Talk to Ryan.
Told them we have to talk about an executive session. I mean, the email I got back from them is they were willing to do a clawback for a percentage.
We asked.
They said a 5 year. I think they ought to do a 10 year.
Oh, so they were even willing to do that.
According to his text message.
Okay. Because we hadn't heard a thing in a week from them, so it was funny that now all of a sudden.
They've been communicating with me, and I've just been pushing them off because it wasn't a real priority, but I wanted to make sure I got Ryan's stuff. It's the county who's not willing to give us anything.
Yeah. Tuesday's agenda.
Yeah, I won't be here.
Okay. Let's just say that.
Well, it was. It's not. Oh, she's gonna call you. Yeah, I was wondering if that was it. Well, apparently the mic's working. Hello. Hi, Ms. Devine. We haven't started yet, but we're gonna put you on mute, and we should be getting started in just a few minutes.
Okay, that'll work.
Thank you.
I don't know.
He's supposed to. Ma'am. He's supposed to. I can call him now. Yeah, you sit over there.
I want to make sure they can hear something that was news to me. That's right. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yes, sir. John, you compare south.
words spelled correctly.
You got it right.
I got it right. You do. Oh, you got it pulled up, so you don't necessarily. You're Mr. Tech. Miss.
I know.
Who's sitting beside you? Oh, yeah. Right there. This one.
Yeah, man.
You're looking mighty dapper.
Thank you. We need to have Lorraine living to the executive session real quick, so we do have to cover this afternoon. Teresa wanted me to let you know, Teresa wanted to go ahead and read out on it so they can add it.
Well, we just add it when it goes into it.
And they add it when they go into it.
Obviously. I'm ready.
No, I think make sure she's gonna do a pretty thorough walkthrough.
Okay.
All right, of everything.
Yeah, I might want to, please.
Two.
Absolutely.
Consultant. Everybody here.
But it
Staff.
mhm.
You rock and roll? Yes, ma'am. Madam Clerk? We're working on it? Okay, okay. Good.
Here. Present.
Mr. McDowell,
Yes.
Mr. Vine, Mr. Davis, Mayor Benjamin. Mayor Benjamin,
Here.
Ms. Devine is joining us remotely today,
Okay.
and Mr. Davis is en route.
All right. Is she live or?
Ms. Devine, can you hear us? Oh, I'm sorry. You there, Ms. Devine? Ms. Devine?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
Yes, ma'am. I on mute. Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
okay, very good.
Let's say aye, just to recognize your
Oh,
presence.
here.
All right. Good deal. All right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa.
We will carry forward our fiscal year 2018 through 2019 budget discussions. I appreciate the time you all have given me and staff. You know, I've called this year of budget discussions a budget of realities. And I'm saying that to many of our employees and former employees who are in the room, because that's where we are. We are looking very closely and have labored and struggled and talked about some hard decisions, and it's time for us to explain those decisions, hopefully in a way that our employees, our retirees, and the citizens of Columbia can understand, because what the city faces is no different than many other public and private entities across the country. Mayor Benjamin knows in his travels as the U.S. president of the Conference of Mayors, sharing some information with me this weekend on the hard decisions that all entities are facing when it comes to health care insurance and coverage for people that have given their service to us for a long time, and we don't take that lightly at all. So what we want to start with, Mayor Benjamin, and I want to be real clear about this is a budget workshop. There are no votes made today. This is a time for council to see the recommendations that I've put in the city manager's budget, because it is the city manager's budget. The decisions and recommendations that I'm putting before council are those that I've had to come up with this staff. And so this is a presentation period. We've had conversations with council, but this is really their first final look at a final budget that's come together. The public hearing for the budget, where people can give additional input, is on June 5th, next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. And that's when there would be a first reading on the budget, which encompasses these decisions that we have to make regarding retiree healthcare insurance coverage, and for our actives as well. So with that, we'll get started with the presentation period. The first presentation explains, and we want to make sure we're real clear, and as we go through it, if the mayor and council have questions, we'll take those questions during the presentation of the Employee and Retiree Healthcare Program. Ms. Pamela Benjamin, Human Resources Director and Chief of Staff.
Let's want to remind everyone, so we have the city manager's conference room is open for folks who may not have seats, some seating there, as well as the chambers are open as well. So as folks show up, if they need some place to sit down. can go in both spaces. Still get it live. Ms. Benjamin, who is of no relation to me, I might add.
You say that again.
Of no relation.
I get asked that
My
question
very
every
best
day.
Forrest Gump voice I can do. We have no relation.
I do. I get that question asked of me every day. Good afternoon. As Ms. Wilson just stated, I am here to give a presentation on some of the things that we've discussed during several meetings that we've had with council. We have been, of course, having this discussion for quite some time now, and we've had some recent presentations, one in February, one in April. And this is a summation of some of that information. We've also had some smaller meetings with council as well to really get a sense of what decisions we can make that are going to be viable to maintain some type of benefit and to make sure that we have coverage for our employees as well as retirees, and which decisions that we're going to make. So as you all know, health care costs continue to rise every year. As you can see the projections, they've increased every single year. I've just given you some information from 2013, from fiscal year 2013 and 2014 up until 2016, 2017, and we're projected at around $25 million for healthcare costs for this particular fiscal year. So that's kind of the trend. You see that trend is increasing every single year. And so every year we do have these discussions about what decisions need to be made in order to maintain health care for our active employees as well as our retirees. So we're here again to have that discussion as well. So in some of our prior presentations, you all have been given some information about what kind of decisions that you need to make. We'll get to it a little bit later in the presentation, but one of the major decisions that need to be made is, are we going to maintain our DDB? And the DDB is a defined dollar benefit. That was established back in 2014? Yes, in 2014. And what we did was council voted to set aside a particular amount of money for each retiree and their dependent in order to try and cap the liability that we had for our OPEB liability. And for those of you who don't know what OPEB is, it's our retiree benefits. It includes pension and employee health care or retiree health care. So we've looked at different scenarios.
Medical and dental.
Medical and dental.
Non-dental.
Not dental. Not dental. It's medical. It's not dental.
Just medical.
It's just medical. So we've looked at from one extreme to the other. What do we do if we don't maintain our DDB, and how does that affect the liability to maintaining it, and in what mechanism we provide that defined dollar benefit to our retirees? And so as we've gone through these discussions over the last couple of months, we've come up with some recommendations that will go on further. You'll see in the slides. So to start some of the changes or some of the proposed recommendations, we're talking about active employee insurance. So currently, we have presented to you as part of Ms. Wilson's budget some ideas about changing employee or active employee health benefits in order to continue to maintain the benefit at a rate that is sustainable for the city of Columbia. So what we're proposing is a phased-in increase to premiums, and we have historically not had that typical 80-20 share that we started out back when Daniel was first on council, and they kind of recommended some balance to the city contribute 80% and the active employee contribute 20%. We're currently around 88% and 12%. So the recommendation is to move that percentage closer to the 80-20 share. It's looking at about $20 average per month increase in premiums for active employees. We're also looking at increasing some of the deductibles, the out-of-pockets, maximums, and the copays, making some changes to that. And also looking at the pharmaceutical tier structure and changing some of the the cost for insurance, for pharmacy cost. As you all know, we did institute a tobacco surcharge, so we're looking at increasing that from $50 to $100, and also at the concept of a spousal surcharge for spouses who have credible coverage available to them. So in this example, or in this situation, if an employee has their spouse covered, their spouse works for an entity that provides health insurance coverage, then in order for that person to remain on the coverage, they'd have to pay an additional surcharge in order to be retained on that employee's coverage.
And if the spouse doesn't?
If the spouse doesn't, then we would still maintain that benefit for that spouse. And they could pay at the current, whatever the rates are for spousal coverage. Anybody have any other questions about that? So those were the things that we were looking at or recommending for the active employees.
And is that, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr.
Is that still roughly 2,000 active employees?
Yes. So we're looking at, we've got 2,063 employees that are covered. Some of our employees aren't covered because they may be on TRICARE or they may have coverage through their spouses, so they're not covered. But that's what we're looking at. We're looking at about 2,600 employees that are active with us. About 2,063 are covered on our plan.
So there's roughly 500 people that have alternative health care, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. They, like I said, some of them are retired military, so they have TRICARE. Some of them have coverage from another entity. Some of them are retirees from another place and they're working with us. So there are different scenarios
Okay.
for those people.
So the deductible and out-of-pocket expenses change. Talk a little bit about that.
So depending on what plan you're on, because the city has 3 different plans. We have a core plan, a buy-up plan, and a base plan. So depending on what plan you're on, your deductible varies. For example, I'm trying to find a little presentation, the last presentation we had. So just to give you an example, if you currently have, you're on the base plan, your deductible is currently $2,000. So with the increases that we're talking about, we would raise that deductible from $2,000 to $2,500. And so that's one of the examples. Out-of-pocket maximum would go from $7,000 to $7,150. So there's some slight changes. Depending on what plan you're on, makes a difference of what your deductibles, your co-pays, and your co-insurances are. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Reverend McDowell? Okay.
Kim, I was gonna say if there was any other context you could give the importance of the spousal surcharge at a time when we're having to make such hard decisions. If you have a spouse who has the opportunity to get coverage, and our coverage has always been as robust as it is, a great plan, we get that. But at a time like this, when we're having to make such hard decisions that affect retirees and actives and everybody, to be more equitable, this is a change that could help them create some savings, because you're kind of putting the onus on people to make decisions, that affect the whole group of people that we're trying to still maintain coverage for. They have the opportunity, they're working, they have the opportunity to get coverage with their own employer versus the expense that is adding to the expense that the city is covering those additional dependents when they have another opportunity for coverage.
Right. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to provide insurance coverage to our active working employees and our retirees. And so it's pretty typical for employers to charge a surcharge to allow people to stay on the coverage whenever the employee's spouse has coverage that they can get other places. So financially, it is our best interest to make sure we're doing what's in the best interest of our active employees. And so that's one of the things that would allow us to do that and spend those resources on those employees who work for us and those spouses who don't have coverage in other places. We see it a lot where our plan is such a great plan that a lot of people forego the coverage that they have in their current employer to be on our plan. Because our plan is richer, we pay better, our deductibles are lower, our premiums are lower than a lot of your other employers. So we see that quite a bit where people are on our plan. But they work every day and they have coverage, or they have the access to coverage in their current employer. So that is very common. But it does factor into how we make these tough decisions about who gets covered and who doesn't get covered and how those resources are utilized. We've looked at $100 per month as a surcharge. That's in some of the data that some of our consultants have used as a proposed surcharge.
And most of the larger cities in South Carolina don't allow don't pay for any spouse coverage at all. They allow them to come on paid for by the employee, but most of the cities in South Carolina pay for the employees, and if they want to cover their families or the spouse, they pay for it separately. Well, I think we're unique in South Carolina by offering any kind of defined dollar benefit beyond the employee themselves.
Certainly, there's certainly a range. You know, you've got all kinds of employers, but some of your major employers, they either don't allow spouses on the coverage or they don't supplement that spouse's insurance like we do. So it's pretty common. A lot of your public entities, they don't allow spouses on the coverage at all.
Ms. Devine, when she has questions, because of the sound quality, she's watching from the stream, and we may have to pause and let her answer her question via text, and we'll relay it. Sure. If you have a question for her, we just need to give her time.
And we certainly will, give more specific information about each plan and the amounts of the changes. We wanted to let you know that this is a follow-up to our previous conversation, and that based on the information we've shared with you all previously, that this is the direction we're going towards to recommend for active employee health benefit changes. Any other questions on that? So as far as retiree health insurance is concerned, we again, like Ms. Wilson has said, have constantly looked at this. I've been here 7 years. This has been a point of discussion ever since I've been here, and I'm sure it will continue to be because this is a challenge for all employers. And we certainly take it very seriously and have considered a lot of the different options out there. But just to give you a little scenario, like I said, in 2012, I think I said 2014, but actually in 2012, the DDB was established for retirees. For the other post-employment benefits, the liability. And it was about $110 million during fiscal year 2013. So the DDB placed a cap on the city's contribution for pre-65 retirees and is currently at $1,130 per month and $840 per month for dependents. So it's $1,130 per month for the retiree themselves and $840 per month for the dependents.
And can you just,
It is $1,130 per month for the retiree and $840 per month for the dependent.
what is the current enrollment in the pre-65 retirement?
Dang, I knew you were gonna ask me that. I don't have my reading glasses.
I had 2 or 3 different numbers, that's why I was curious.
We're looking at 386 participants. Now, when I say that number, of course, it may vary a little bit based on how many dependents a person has. So we have, for example, we have 24 people that have full family coverage. So they may have 3 people on their plan, they may have 4 people, they may have 5 people, they may have 10 people. So I'm looking at the number of plans that we have for those retirees. And all the city covers about 5,000 lives between active and retirees.
So I had roughly a number that was given to me by one of these meetings of roughly 402 pre-65 coverages. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that depends
Okay.
too on when you got that.
Yeah,
number,
because it fluctuates, because people roll off and go to
Roll.
post 65, people come on, people.
So if we just use
people-
400 as an average, that may be a safe number.
Okay. The DDB for post 65 retired.
Pre-65.
Pre-65. So there's a difference between pre-65 and post-65, right? So the DDB for the post-65, and those are Medicare eligible retirees, is $300 for the retiree and $225 for the dependent. So that's $300 for the retiree and $225 for the dependent. So that is the amount of money that the city contributes to, sets aside for.
Gap
The
coverage,
DDB.
essentially.
Right. So what we do for the post 65 is we have a supplemental plan that is offered through United Healthcare. And the post 65 retirees also have to pay a premium for medical and pharmacy, even though we're contributing the DDB currently, because that's the total cost of the plan. Based on the fact that it's a small population and their experience is pretty high, then that makes us have to pay around $400 for pharmacy and another almost $400 for medical. So it's pretty expensive for us to offer that supplemental plan. But again, it's a supplemental plan. Medicare is primary. United Healthcare is a supplemental plan for the post 65.
So your real cost of supplemental is 700 or 400?
It's 300.
300?
Right. On top of the cities, what the city's already paying.
Right, so you're really talking about 700 per person.
Right.
And the market out there is much less if it's done individually, correct?
It absolutely is.
According to some of the retirees who've not taken it and gone and done their own, they're paying
Right.
significantly less per month for supplemental.
That is correct.
Because we're having to create a program specifically for that. That's why the costs are so high.
Exactly. And we do, from time to time, we hear from our post-65 retirees who say, I could get a cheaper plan out there on my own. If I just go out to, AARP or United Healthcare, I can get a cheaper plan. And we say, you're absolutely right. Because you may, depending on your personal situation, be able to get a plan that's much cheaper. So that is something that we hear quite often. In FY18, the city is contributing more than the DDB amount as a result of not increasing retiree premiums and not making any plan changes. So because we haven't increased retiree premiums and we haven't really maintained that DDB, we're here facing some really significant decisions. If the city fails to maintain the DDB going forward, its OPEB liability could go up 2 to 4 times higher by fiscal year 2047, and we're looking at $1 billion liability. So that's why we've looked at some hard decisions.
You mind, you or someone's just bringing it back home, why 2047 is important and how that affects our budgeting today and year after year? And maybe what that $1 billion liability means in terms of our annual contributions and the like.
In simple terms, we won't be able to cover our active employees, let alone retirees going into the future if we continue at the pace that we are. I mean, that's just an unheard of liability to bear. You can't do it.
2047 is a 30-year window.
Yeah, it's the 30-year window. Of course, it's 30 years out, and we have had actuarial studies done looking at our current population and all the factors that they look at during the actuarial study as far as age, gender, length of morbidity. There are all these factors that go into how they come up with the actuarial study. But 2047 is 30 years out. So we're looking at how that.
And we're required to compute and show that long-term liability over a 30-year horizon. And then we have to set aside funds each year to meet that long-term liability. Do we have a number that shows us what that looks like to meet I know we got pay go and everything else, but we're talking about a lot of money.
On an annual basis, how much would we
We're
be
talking
able
about
to set
an
aside?
inability not just to cover healthcare expenses, but an inability to cover basic
Correct.
services for the city
Correct.
if we don't get our arms around this.
Correct.
I think we gotta make sure people understand we're not
The
just talking
gravity
about-
of it.
We're not
Exactly.
just talking about insurance for retirees or even active employees. We're talking about an inability to meet basic services if we don't get our arms around the expense long term.
Yes, sir.
That's what it is. Just trying to make sure.
Okay, so as we've talked through the months, the decision has been made of whether we're going to maintain that DDB or not, because that's one huge decision. And then if we do, what mechanism is that going to look like? And then it's also been a decision, or it needs to be a decision made of who will be eligible for the retiree health insurance benefits going forward after this fiscal year on forward. So when we looked at some possible decisions about what to do, we looked at creating a health reimbursement account based on the current DDB and the amount for the pre-65 retirees. The HRA would be based on that 1,130 or that 840 for those employees who are current pre-65 retirees and employees hired prior to July 1st, 2009 that meet eligibility requirements for retirement. So we looked at how do we cap that population? How do we give some of our longer-term employees the benefit of having health insurance when they retire? How do we make sure that we're providing something to those long-term employees and our current retirees? So those were two of the decision points that we're recommending based on Ms. Wilson's budget. We're also looking at the possibility of eliminating post-65 coverage for retirees, and that would be eliminating the DDB for that population, and they would no longer be receiving that $300 or $225 DDB, depending on whether they're a retiree or a dependent. We've also looked at adding an age requirement to be 55 years of age, in addition to the requirement for the 20 years of service with the City of Columbia. And that 20 years of service is based on those employees that were here prior to July 1st of 2009. So that's the eligibility requirement for employees that were here prior to July 1st, 2009. After July 1st, 2009, it changed to 25 years for police officers' retirement and 28 years for regular retirees. So that's where that line was drawn. It wasn't an arbitrary line. That's where that line was drawn. What we find is our average age for our retirees, our pre-65 retirees, is about 57 years old. So a lot of our pre-65 retirees go on and have other employment and have some of them, a lot of them have the opportunity to get coverage with their current employer. So we were looking at how do we balance between offering coverage to people who don't have the opportunity to have coverage and those employees or those retirees who may have the opportunity to have coverage at other places.
Did you look at,
Mr. Brickman, I'm sorry, we're getting questions or comments online. If you all can make sure you're speaking into your microphones or not covering your microphones. I think we're able to hear you as well. Thank you.
so,
It's actually online, those from Tamika.
I'm sorry, it was online.
so as we look at, number two, which an HR account is something we've talked about, since we do have money put away and it's a way to feed that and you keep the regular. Have you looked at, you have eliminated post-65 coverage for retirees. What is, based on the population we have today, then can we not put an HRA account together for that, to carry those folks who are in the system? I mean, they have a better opportunity to get a better quality health care. And to be quite honest, it's savings on this side of the fence too, because we're overpaying to cover them today. And they're not getting a better coverage. To create an HRA account for them as well,
Certainly.
and still be able to maintain our balance, because that's what we're looking at this point. I mean, to me, that makes more sense.
Right.
Right now, we're the numbers, staggering.
Yeah. These are recommendations. We certainly can tweak and make adjustments to those. We have looked at options, because you all know we had those options 1 through 3 that were presented. I think, when was that? Was that in April? And one of those options allowed for continuing the DDB for that post-65 group. So that is one of the options that we've presented to you all in the past. We certainly can make that adjustment to this list of recommendations.
But we could set it up the same way, where
We could
would get a
absolutely set it up the
deposit.
same
So,
way.
I mean, based on line item 2, if you went in, I think I figured out today that's almost about $13,500 per employee, pre-65 employee.
Right, so, and like you said, the
And it's an
HRA,
additional 10 if you add a spouse that's other, which is a lot of money as well. So you're really talking about, if there's an employee and a spouse together that don't have options, we're contributing $23,000 into an HRA account.
that's correct. So go ahead.
Ms. Benjamin, what's the savings to the city if we eliminate spousal coverage for the active as well as the retirees? Do you know that figure?
I don't know that figure off the top of my head.
It'd be
I
substantial.
really,
Mr. Rickman's already said it's $10,000.
That's just for post.
that's for post,
Yeah.
right. So
we
there's
contribute
a
$840.
totally different contribution rate for active employees than
Well,
it
if you
is.
eliminate it for active that have credible coverage elsewhere, would that not be a substantial savings in itself?
We certainly, it would eliminate a population of covered participants.
For those that have creditable coverage elsewhere.
But you mean, and don't do the surcharge?
Don't do the surcharge, just
Just eliminate the coverage.
eliminate the coverage if you have creditable coverage elsewhere.
And I'm sure Ms. Devon is probably going to chime in here as well. What's the threshold for credible coverage elsewhere? How do we determine that?
There's an ACA and an IRS threshold for determining what credible coverage is. It's based on how much it costs, and how much of your income that coverage would cost you to have that. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It's an income ratio, and I'd have to get that.
Objectively subjective, okay.
Credible coverage. is.
Surcharge doesn't.
There is a
help.
definition for it.
You'll be back here in 12 months having to change it again. It just doesn't work.
I will look it up for you. I don't
You-
have
you
that
would have a-
information.
No, okay. You'll have a model for us on that we can look at.
Certainly. One of the things that, we can look at it.
Yeah.
We can look at the definition of what credible coverage is. It is certainly a recruiting tool and a retention tool for us to be able to offer health insurance for our active employees' spouses. That's a really significant thing for us, and so we really hadn't considered eliminating that, but we certainly will look at the numbers.
But if they had creditable coverage elsewhere, that wouldn't be such a big recruiting tool. It would be a recruiting tool if they didn't have their coverage.
Coming in the door. You mean coming
Yeah,
into the
we,
system?
we'll certainly look at it. I mean, there are employers who do that, who don't offer coverage to employee spouses who have credible coverage, and they're active. So that is something that we certainly can look at.
I think we need to look at that seriously. I think that would be a,
Last question when you get a chance.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Devine, go ahead.
Okay, just two things. This is part of my delay, so go back to the retirees and their coverage. So if a retiree has the option of coverage somewhere else, how do we know that? And the reason I'm asking is I know in the past we've had retirees that have had other jobs that had option to be covered somewhere else, but because our coverage is so good, they've declined the coverage somewhere else.
It would be an affidavit. I mean, I know that we could, there's only so much we can do to dig into that factually, but I mean, certainly we would expect people to be honest, and there's a process that the Human Resources Department would go through, to seek that information. But once we've asked and we get an answer and it's on an affidavit, I mean, that's what we would have to go by essentially. I think there's some other steps, but that's about as far as probably we would go to determine that.
And for the spouses, we would have everybody who has a spouse submit us a letter from the HR department of their spouse's employer saying that they don't have credible coverage. So we get the affidavit and we get the letter.
That first question was really, it was about the retirees, the employees
Themselves.
themselves, not the staff.
Yeah, they would have to we would have to,
I'm just thinking along those lines because I know that's an expensive part of our coverage. And then my second question and comment along the lines of the spouse, and, I think the surcharge is fair, and maybe part of that is looking at, what that surcharge is so that, it is fair and compensates us a little bit. But, I would reiterate what I've said before. I think that we do have that concern as far as recruitment and retention of our current employees. We talked about this in the past where someone can leave the city and make much more in the private sector, especially when you're talking about engineering or, folks with the skills that we need. And part of the allure of the city is I think that we have a good healthcare coverage, and if you consider adjusting it to the point where that amount doesn't encourage them to stay anymore, I think that we're running a risk. So I think we need to look at all options as far as families, but when you're looking at people with younger families, and I know we can't exclude children, but when you think about spouses, we have folks who have spouses who may not work, or we have spouses that don't have coverage other places, and I think that a surcharge is probably is a fair option for us to look at as far as keeping those folks and as a recruitment and a retention tool.
We'd be required to offer them insurance anyway, Tamika, if they didn't have other insurance. You couldn't just deny a spouse.
right.
If they don't have credit, it will turn on the credible coverage piece.
Well, no, I'm actually going to Mr. Duvall's comment. I mean, I don't know, would his comment or would his suggestion require us, even if they didn't have credible, because we keep talking, there's two different things here. We're talking about credible coverage somewhere else, and then we're talking about eliminating them altogether, and I think those are two different conversations.
and
They are.
And my suggestion would be if they have creditable coverage elsewhere, to eliminate them from both active employees and retired employees. And furthermore, what I would like to do is look at the savings that we could accumulate, especially if we eliminate spousal coverage with credible coverage in the active ranks. That's going to be several $1 million, and put that back into employee benefits that would help all 2,000 of our employees rather than the small percentage that would fit the criteria of having a spouse or a family that needs coverage.
A lot of employers, if they do that, those spouses that don't have access to coverage would either pay the full amount. They would pay our portion, city's portion, and the premium portion. So that's what a lot of employers do. If their spouses don't have credible coverage, they may charge them the total cost for that coverage. So there are ways to
We're not talking about
kind of
going
work
that far
around
yet.
it.
No.
Howard, and apparently I'm getting calls that it's difficult for people to hear us online. So all of us, let's see if we can lean up a little more into the microphones as we speak. All right, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about what this HRA looks like, how it would provide some benefit to our retirees. What an HRA is essentially a health reimbursement account that would go into that amount that we set aside right now for the DDB, the 1130 and the 840 would go on into an HRA account. That HRA account will be used by the retiree, because in this situation we're talking about the pre and potentially the post 65. That would go into an account, and what they would do with those funds is they could use it to pay their health insurance premiums, health plan deductibles, costs for doctor's office visits, prescriptions, x-rays, any other IRS approved medical expenses. So what in essence it would be, instead of us having a retiree health insurance plan, we would give each individual retiree their DDB, and then they would be able to go out and shop for their own plan. So for some of our retirees, it would certainly be a cheaper situation than for others. So for example, we've got one here. This is an example of a pre-Medicare retiree, an individual that's 60 years old in Richland County, because what we've already done is one of our consultants, and we gave this to you in a prior presentation, they did an analysis of the plans that are offered out there. And as you can see, the plans are broken down into bronze, silver, or gold. And depending on which plan the person chooses would depend on their deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, and then what their monthly premiums would be. So for example, if you look down at the bottom where it says retiree pays, some retirees could pay nothing for their coverage. Our DDB could cover the entire cost of their coverage. Others may have to pay more depending on which level of coverage they choose. And it also depends on where you are located geographically. But there are definitely plans available out there that the retiree would be able to take advantage of. And if we did that for the post 65, there are even more plans that are available for that population because of there's more activity in the market for post 65 retirees. And I don't think I included a slide for that because I didn't think that was one of our options, but we certainly have researched and looked at what those plans look like, how they're tiered, and what that will look like for the retiree. So it's really a replacement of the benefit. And again, they would have the opportunity to go out, search the market, and find a plan that's available for them. We certainly would not be forcing them to do that by themselves. We would hire a navigator who would sit down with the retiree, each of them, because they each have different medical and different personal situations, and help them navigate and choose which plan is best for them. So it would be based on what their current health is, what kind of prescriptions they take, those types of things, in order to make the decision of which plan is most suitable for them. And then they would use that money on the HRA to pay for their premiums, and they would also use it for any other medical IRS approved medical expenses that they may have. Anybody have any questions about that?
Such as, Pam, maybe talk about IRS approved medical expenses. So, for example,
Well, it would be
it
like
runs the
like
gamut.
co-pays, prescriptions, you know, any kind of fees that you're charged in your doctor's office. It would be, you know, insulin or any type of things like that. Things that wouldn't be covered would be like plastic surgery, like Botox, like things that are elective, they may not be covered. That varies. The IRS changes what's covered and what's not covered each year, seems like it, because you used to could buy over-the-counter medications. Now you can't do that as much anymore or at all for most of them. So it would just depend on what the IRS regulations are. But it's going to be most of your high dollar or your routine medical expenses that you be paying now with your coverage now. Your co-pays, your co-insurances, your out-of-pocket charges. You know, if you go to the doctor and they give you a bill because you got an x-ray, you could pay for that using your HRA funds. So it's going to be most of your standard medical expenses.
And if it doesn't run out on a year and during the course of 1 year, what happened to it?
It depends on how we set up our HRA accounts. Depends on if we set a maximum. Some of them, it just continues to roll over no matter what. Others have caps. It would depend on how we design our HRA account to what would happen with those funds. Some of them, if you don't use it by the end of the year, then the funds go away. Others allow you to carry over some of it or all of it. It would depend on how we structured it.
Well, can you possibly just give me a little background, because I'm struggling with just the number a little bit. You know, from an employee standpoint, we have a DBA, and that could continue to grow. We're using this $1,130 for the
A DDB?
Yeah, for the retiree, right? But the spousal number seems kind of high to me, that we're contributing 75%, but the employee is our responsibility. I mean, have we looked at changing those numbers where you could call it a shift or whatever, but it seems to me our responsibility is to the employee first and foremost, and long-term, than it is to an individual that didn't work at the city, spouse or whatever. I mean, I don't know everybody's situations differently. I'm just sitting here looking at the numbers and going, you know, there's different ways to attack this, and, you know, is the obligation that we need to be putting forward to the individual that worked here, and that was their contribution. Because it's hard to rationalize that you're paying 75% of somebody's cost that didn't work here,
Well,
instead of paying 100% of the cost of the person who did. I'm just throwing out food for thought as you're looking at these numbers.
well, and the DDB that's set up now was established in 2012, so we were just in an effort to maintain that current DDB. That's what the recommendations are based on. You know, an actuarial study was done, and those were the recommendations made by the consultant at that time. We can certainly look at adjusting that DDB to give more to the retiree and less to the spouse.
I mean, our obligation would be to the employee or retiree, first
Certainly.
and foremost.
We can certainly look at that. But we were just maintaining and that's what all of our projected cost and all of our projected liability is based on that current DDB that was established back in 2012. And so that's kind of, you know, what we've used as a guidepost for the data that you all have seen previously. But we can certainly look at that.
It was based on that 80-20 rule, and it was also set based on what the coverage would be at the time, the premiums were at that time.
Yeah, it's still, to me, it still becomes a question of your first and foremost responsibility should be to the employee who worked here.
He's saying that he's saying against the backdrop of, as you're doing math here, and some employees maybe not ever having to come out of pocket, others having to come out of pocket, actually helping meet those employees' needs first before you extend the obligation to spouses. So it's just
Well, it's from a contribution standpoint.
Let me,
It just, it doesn't make, the math just doesn't make
It
sense.
seems so much.
Again, like Missy said, but it was based on the 80/20 and the premiums at the time, because we were looking at all those figures back in 2012, and we haven't recalculated that DDB. Haven't increased it for inflation, anything like that.
Yeah, it may be worth it doing. Take a look at what that number would be today, reflective of today, based on the employee. Pre 65 or, I mean, post 65, it's clear that the better deal and the better coverage is to do it individually.
just a question on that. We have that formula now, as you said, because that was the standard or the model in 12. If we go back, when you research different models, looking at spouse not contributing at all, we would or could maybe come up with a model that maybe not contributing that much to a spouse that's not contributing, but not totally eliminating them.
Well, I think, I mean, for us, I think we have a multitude of options.
Yeah,
I think we want to figure out what the best option that realistically that is sustainable, and where we are today is not sustainable, as you've seen the numbers.
Right.
I mean, it's just not possible. We can sit here and try to lie to everybody, everything can maintain the way it is, but it wouldn't. 5 years, you won't have health care. So the reality is we have to make some changes here, and we need to figure out what's best, but I think there's an obligation first and foremost to one group over another, and I think we need to look at it that way. Just food for thought.
No,
But until we put the numbers on the board, you can't, I mean, you can't do that, but it's just, it seems interesting that the percentages are done that way.
Well, I think it probably goes to also just the philosophical discussion of it all as well, and some of the points maybe Ms. Devine was raising. I mean, that has been the model that the city has done for many, many years. When I came to the city, I always tell the story, I was shocked because I came from a different institution, a private industry, and I was getting my first paycheck and noticed I didn't have to pay for my health care insurance. I was shocked. I was like, where's the money taken out of my check? So over time, there's been a wonderful system here at the city to do everything we could to take care of the employees and the spouse. Children are still, by law, we have to take care of children and dependents. But spouses, I think it goes to, is it a recruitment tool? Is it something that has been a recruitment tool and now we can't really maintain that anymore? I think what we presented was based off kind of where we've been and not
at that time.
Well, I mean,
going away from that philosophical.
Well, I think overall, the system's changed. You can go to Greenville, you go to Charleston, they all have different, and a lot of them are eliminated. Post 65, other people are paying in this, they don't take spouses. I mean, it's constantly changing.
Exactly.
I think recruitment's changed, and I don't think you have as many people who come and work for 20, 25 years
Correct.
like you used to.
Correct.
I mean, things have changed, the opportunities, people are more mobile today, they don't stay in communities as long. I mean, there are all these factors that we could look at, but the reality is 2008 and 9, our health care was $14-15 million, and now we're at double.
Right.
And that wasn't that long ago, so, making those challenges, but still being able to provide for those folks who work here and served here, I think we got to try to come up with a good balance on that. And, you just can't have everything, so we've got to figure out where's our priority.
Well, the best recruiting tool would be to get our starting pay and follow-on pay up by using the savings we're gonna have from healthcare, and that would go to everybody that works for the city of Columbia. Pay is the best recruiter.
You'd have to have some savings to pay it, to pay.
It's the protocol is no, but their questions, I do want to make sure they're asked and answered. So, are you done yet? Oh, the questions.
I am.
I did have a question concerning when we got to the 2009 and we were backing up to 2009. And it was on the second page that said if, there would be no coverage until the age of 55 or 20 years of service. Does that mean if you left after 2009, if you were prior to 2009 employed, or does that mean, if I've got a 52-year-old person that's eligible for retirement today, can he not retire for 30 years?
Now, okay, so there are two different things going on here, right? So one of them is their eligibility to retire through the South Carolina retirement system. So a person could potentially retire because they have the years of service with the South Carolina retirement system. Then there's the eligibility for our retiree health insurance. So there are two separate eligibility requirements.
But the average person
So-
is going to retire if he has to go get his own insurance for 3 years. Or, you know what I'm saying? I mean, is there a cutoff, is there a grandfather period when that would have been, if that's one thing that got, say, hey, that's the one we want, that's the model we want, and you're 51 years old, retired right now, or you don't have insurance for 4 years, or are you grandfathered in?
So current retirees would be eligible for the benefit. It would be going forward. For
New
2019 forward, you'd have to be 55 years old.
That's new
going
hires.
forward.
Or if you're retirement eligible with your years, and there's so many, Pam will have to help me with this, because I know I'll mess it up. Because there's so many ways now that you'd have to count your retirement eligibility. If the rule of 90 applies starting in 2014, correct, Pam, through the state retirement system. If you were with the city prior to 2009, then at that point in time, you only had to have 20 years with the city, and you wouldn't have had to get to the 25 or 28 years. So it's all going to depend on the individual. But assuming you could retire before January 1 of 2019, then you would be able to go ahead and retire and take advantage of this system
And not be 55.
and not be 55.
And not be 55.
I think what he's trying to ask is, if you were hired before 2009, does the 55 age requirement apply?
No.
No,
It only applies to active employees.
No.
It's not
No.
retro to current active.
it does not.
It just seemed like that was one of the only things that wasn't clear. If we agree with it or not, obviously, we got
Right.
different opinions over here, but that wasn't clear on that.
So up to this point, we've had no age requirement.
Right.
So if we
This
retire
is-
after January, is the 55 going to go into effect?
Potentially, if that's one of the recommendations that's accepted.
So I'd have to work 15 more years to take it instead of 7?
Not if you were hired
Depends on-
before.
Not if you were hired before 2009.
That's what I'm asking, okay.
Not if you were
So the
hired before.
grandfather in the 2009.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we opening it up?
No, that's. You would have to be retired now or retire by January 1 of 2019 in order to not have to meet the 55-year requirement. So you'd have to be an active retiree now or a person who retires by 12/31 of 2018 in order to be under 55. After January 1st, 2019, you'd have to be 55 years of age in addition to meeting the other requirements.
Okay, so if I retire in 7 years, I have to work on 55.
Yes.
So I have to work 15 years to take my insurance, and I was promised 55.
No, you can retire.
For the intention. Even if you were here before 2009.
Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't, someone asked something. Couldn't see you or hear.
Question.
I thought that was.
That's what.
You want to, they're gonna be to ask questions.
Yeah, that's what
That's
we're
what-
doing.
That's what we're doing right now. I mean, so it'd be easier. Now, listen, no, we want questions, not a speech. Okay, so the main reason I ask the questions is actually ask a question and get an answer. So that's the only rule of asking questions. You actually have to ask a question. It's not post-speech, but this is an opportunity. Typically, work sessions don't have Q&A, but I know there are a lot of questions. They're going to help inform us as we move forward. So if you got a question, yeah, please come and do it. And it's probably easier to do it from where you are, but I wonder if in the interest of posterity, we need to do them at the microphone. I don't know. We don't have a walk around mic, do we? I don't think we do.
That's it. And we'd have to adjust it, but that's what
Yeah. So
that means.
let's go ahead and is that okay with y'all? Let's
Yeah,
let's-
yeah, I don't have a problem
Have
with that.
questions?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and ask them. Don't raise your hand. We got everybody get a chance to ask a question.
Steve.
Yes, sir.
Let's make sure she's kind of finished.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you done? I think she was in the question section. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, she's ready for questions.
You want me to come up here, or how you wanna?
Yeah,
We're gonna try to get a walk around mic, if not for the time being.
yeah. We're gonna try to find a walk around mic, y'all, but only because folks who weren't able to be here are also watching online and want to be able to. You probably have questions to ask that they can't ask from where they are. So if you don't mind, come up front and asking a question. That'd be appreciated. And you already. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, actually, state your name for the record and the question.
My name's Matthew Hurstler. I work for the fire department.
Yes, sir.
Just some things to consider. I got hired when I was 18 years old. As of January 1st, 2019, if that 55-year-old age went into effect, you would have multiple firemen having to do 36 years in the fire service to maintain that coverage. It's just some things to consider for guys who got in at an earlier age. And that's a long time in the fire service or police service.
And so let me counter a little bit with that, which I understand what you're saying, and I think that's still a recommendation we're looking at. But I guess you would also have to understand that because of that age and the ability for you to continue to work and work another job, which many of you also do at a very young age, that also is a factor with you being able to have coverage somewhere else potentially where you can get insurance and still be getting the insurance from the city. So you gotta look at both sides of it.
But that's a very legitimate concern.
it is.
Thank you for raising that. Thank you.
Yes, and we looked at that because, of course, we know the age and the demographics of our workforce. So, definitely.
I was curious as to why, have we explored the state healthcare plan?
Name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Investigator Mostella, Police Department. Have we explored the state healthcare plan?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Because I was looking at it, that y'all currently pay $8,000 for me a year, and it's about $3,500 less. So I just was curious if y'all.
It's not apples and oranges comparison.
You need to talk in the mic, Pam.
Sorry. You know, insurance is a numbers game, and the state health plan has a whole lot more covered people than we do. They have like
500,000.
right 500,000 people. So when you talk about getting the premiums in for 500,000 people, that's a big difference between the 2,600 employees that we have.
The coverage is
2,400.
not comparable. If
It isn't as good a coverage.
No, but it'll be better than what y'all are offering.
No, ma'am. It's actually not.
I'd have to argue with you on that one.
Yeah.
And I also have a concern about the 55 and older. When I came here, you told me I had to work 20 years. You promised that to all people that were hired before 2000, that we only had to work 20 years. I understand it not being free, but so you're telling me I'm gonna have to work 15 more years to take my insurance with me. I'm not very pleased with that, and a lot of us are not, because I have given my time in of 25 years, but I will still have to work 8 more years just to take my insurance that I should be entitled to anyway, because I'm an employee of the city.
Yes, ma'am. We understand that concern.
Just so some people don't know, so currently, what the cutoff date, so you have to do 25 years
In
if
retirement,
to get retirement,
right.
correct?
It depends.
Depends on when you were hired.
Right, because if people who are currently here, who just got hired, they have to work the rule of 90. So they have to work 30 years and be 60 years old, or whatever that age and retirement years equal. State law. That's the state law,
So,
right.
Something we should look into is how do we just match it to the same way, because that way it gives people the opportunity who have been in one segment in another.
Well, you did do that in 2009. We matched, I mean, we do
We matched it
follow
for what it was at
the
that time.
time.
It's changed
Right,
since
It's changed
then.
again.
Right.
That's
Because it was 25 and 28
Right.
and when we made that change.
And what is it now?
It's the rule of 90.
Rule of 90.
Mm-hmm.
Rule of 90 is more stringent than the age 55.
Not
Right.
for public safety. We have our
25.
requirement. Yeah. It's 20.
You're still subject to the
It's
rule of 90. Everybody's subject to the rule of 90.
So that's the other, we understand exactly what you're saying, but what if we didn't add that caveat about before 2009 and the 20 years? Then you would have been following the 25 or the rule of 90.
Right,
Correct.
or you think y'all could grandfather us in like you did when you changed the 20 years to the people that have to work more than 20 now to get their retirement? I would feel that it would be fair to grandfather us in.
We are grandfathering you in by adding employees hired before July 1st, 2009. Because that wasn't originally, when you just looked at what the consultant presented to us to do, they didn't even do that. So this is an additional thing that we've come back and done, and we did that because you're right. In 2009, there was a set of rules for the city to get insurance, working 20 years.
Right, and employees, even employees after 2009 have to work 25 or 28 years. Those employed after 2014 have to work the rule of 90. So it just, the eligibility changes.
Can you just clarify, because I'm having a hard time following it. To me, if an employee was hired before 2009, then whenever they're set that time frame, what did we say, 25 years? Is that what I
It was
understood?
20 years
20
before
years.
2009.
So whenever that segment is in, that's what this should be said, correct?
Right, but my understanding is she just, when we asked the question, was that they're gonna add the 55 on that, was what. So that means that if I was hired in 2000, my 20 years is in 2 years, but because that's gonna say 55, I would have to work my retirement eligibility time
We
plus,
include that age.
plus.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
So you're not retirement eligible. You won't be retirement
Right.
eligible.
It didn't make
You're talking
sense.
about maintaining insurance
Correct.
after leaving 2 years, not retiring.
I'm retirement eligible in 7 years, but if this 55 requirement is added on, then I won't be able to take my insurance for 15 more years, meaning that I will have to work 8 years past my retirement just to get insurance that was promised to me when I was hired. Because you're telling me I would have to work till 55 to take my insurance. Is the way I'm understanding that.
I'm a gentleman. I'm never going to ask your age, okay? But I'm trying to keep up with the numbers here,
That's fine.
okay?
That's
All
fine. You
right,
can ask
okay,
my age.
okay, all right.
But the way I'm understanding it is, if this goes implements, then I would have to work 15 more years to take my insurance with me when I can retire in 7 more years,
When did you start with the city?
2000.
and it will depend on, how old you were when you started as to, if we did institute that age requirement.
And I just don't think that is fair to those of us. I'm 40. I'm trying to say it. But that's why I'm saying 50, it'd be 15 more years. I just don't think that's fair for those of us that have given you 18, 20, 25 years. Now you're going to tell me I'm going to have to work 8 more to take me after I retire.
So you're gonna, well, I mean,
That 15
you're gonna stop working when you're not gonna go work anywhere else when you start working with the city at that age. Probably not.
I don't want to work 30 years. How many years is it?
You get 1.82% for every year you work past your 20 or 25 or 28.
That's something we ought to clarify. I don't know.
I don't want to work 36 years.
What's your numbers right? I'm ready for your numbers.
Y'all get a deal.
That's the problem.
Think a little bit.
Thank you.
God, if I could retire at 40, I'd be happy. I'd be retired.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Deborah Martin, also known as DK. Retired in 2012 from the police department. I was a lieutenant with them. My question is, under the HRA, you're saying that we would have to, if that's what's going on, then we would have to with the use of a navigator, get our own insurance? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My question is, if you have pre-existing conditions, how is that gonna impact you being able to get insurance? You know, I've been insured by the city of Columbia since 1987. So my insurance, and I understand, I appreciated that I didn't have to pay. I was a single person, I am a single person. But when I go to look at, I've had some health issues that have cropped up in the last couple years. So if I go and look for new insurance, how is that gonna impact me with my, I have pre-existing conditions now. So that's something I would like to have answered, if we can answer that question, please.
So, currently under the ACA, there are no pre-existing condition exclusions or that doesn't factor into whether or not you get coverage or not. Yeah. Certainly know things can change, and they certainly do. But currently under the ACA regulations, pre-existing conditions can't be used to not provide somebody with insurance coverage.
Pam, talk about the network in this area. Well, for someone in her situation, or any of our retirees who would be using the navigator. I mean, it's not like we're Florida, as you've often said. In South Carolina, there's going to be the Blues and other groups that would probably be where they would be getting their coverage from. I don't know, and this is a question, being that, whatever our working relationships are through the navigator with those potential coverages for these folks, if that's something we could inquire about on their behalf, about pre-existing conditions and that sort of thing. I mean, we'll do our best to.
Again, the ACA prohibits people from
I understand that, but it's in
pre-existing.
her concern that if that were to go away, and now we've, sending them out to the market, is there any considerations that we can discuss with the providers?
I don't know. We'd have to look at that. I'm not sure. I mean, they would be looking at coverages on the open market. So whatever those coverages were providing is what would be out there. I don't know that we could, have any influence over that, because if that was the case, we'd be creating our own plan again and kind of getting back to where we are now. So I don't know that we could influence that in any way.
Thank you. My name is Dan Beatonbaugh. I'm from the private sector. My wife is a retiree here at the city. And it sounds like to me a lot of this is based on a defined dollar benefit, which was set up in 2012. And basically, my whole understanding of insurance is the young help pay for the old. And y'all have never had two insurances, one for employees and one for retirees. In this whole meeting, I think most of the retirees are missing it, is now there's going to be two insurances. And it sounds like y'all are trying to balance your budget by putting a lot of the cost on the retirees, not that you have numbers up here this time. But that's my question is, why not have one insurance that covers retirees and employees?
That's
what
part of
we
the
have
that's what we
now.
have.
That's what
part of the
we've been
problem.
doing for
That's why it's
years.
costing so much, because it costs us $700 for a retiree when the open market is roughly $200 in a supplement. We're having to create a program in ourselves. That's part of
And
the
that's
issue.
because you're covering 88% of 2,000 people when you should be covering 80%. And you have a lot of retirees, only 300, who are, of course, costing you more because these people have served the city 30 years as firemen and everything else, have a lot of health issues. And so a retiree is going to cost you more. They're older, they're sicker.
In all fairness, it's not just that. You have to look at it globally in that question, because we've also been supplementing spouses, families, and everything else. So you can't just say it's just one individual and that this group is carrying this group, because that's not true. We've got individuals who have never, or a family, let's use a family of four who've never cost the city anything really other than their premium. But then we got individuals who've cost the city 5 times what the rest of the groups cost. So it's,
basically, you are saying that the
there's not two
employees are
separate
costing
groups.
you less, so that's why they're having a separate.
No, that's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is that we've had one insurance the whole time. But we've created a program to carry when there's better options that we should be looking at that provide better coverage and care. We're spending extra money just to cover, which doesn't make sense.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense.
As long as, like I say, my main concern is the retirees who have served the city for so long get a fair plan that is affordable.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it sustainable.
And I promise you, that's our concern too. That's the reason we're sitting here.
We're looking at affordability, whether they're with us or they're in the private sector.
Let me say this, y'all, and I know this is always a tough issue to discuss, and I tell myself I'm going to listen more than I talk today, because I really want to, if we have more questions, I want people to ask their questions too, and hopefully we'll get some more concerns addressed. This is a great deal different than what our consultants brought back to us. This is not an exercise in balancing the budget. And I always hate when it's characterized as something that's just as simple as that. This is not balancing the budget. This is indeed an exercise in just pure sustainability. How do we make sure that people have access to health insurance coverage as long as we possibly can, and make sure it's affordable for as many of our folks, current employees, retirees, and if we can, their families as well, as long as we possibly can. Cities all across this country are eliminating health insurance coverage, eliminating it, not reducing it, eliminating it. Cities, counties, and states. So I don't want you to think that we're going to do some callous penciling of a budget process here that seeks to deny someone anything. I mean, believe me, if we could have universal coverage for everybody within our reach, whether it be city employees, or dependents, or anyone else, we would do that. It is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. So this is an exercise in fiscal responsibility and fiscal courage and just pure sustainability. How do we make sure that not only do we provide health insurance coverage, but how are we making sure that we're actually able to provide fire protection coverage for the people of the city, police protection coverage, basic services. I mean, that's what this discussion is about. It is not sustainable to look at 30 years down the line to have $1 billion non-pension related long-term liability. It's just not. It's just not. And it would be not just imprudent, but irresponsible for us to not go through this process and figure out how we can do this in as thoughtful and as fair way possible. I promise you that's where our heads are, that's where our hearts are. That's where we're trying to get to. It is a tough process. It's a tough process, not just for you all, but for each and every one of us, for the people in this room, that many of whom you may know and you love and have worked side by side with for years. But this is not easy, and I don't want anyone to think it's just us figuring out how to balance our doggone budget here. That's not what this is. We work side by side with you. I will tell you that people in this room, including several of our employees I interface with every single day, who would be adversely affected to some degree by this, and I love them. I mean, I love them. I love them like brothers and sisters. So I mean, and just like I love you all. So I don't want you to think it's that's not the process. We're trying to work through this in some way that makes sense, but still allow the city to continue to provide services to everyone who's either here long-term as well as meeting the needs of our employees. It's a tough one. We're going to work through it together, but it's not simply a penciling exercise. And so you've had your hand up a couple of times. You might come to the microphone?
Did he walk
Did he go? Did he leave?
Where'd he go?
Okay, you can come on up.
Do you have a question?
No. In the meantime, I want you to go up, sir. Then you can follow him. And gentleman kept raising his hand back there. If he comes back up, he can go third. Yes, sir.
Rusty Smith, retired assistant chief, Columbia Fire Department, 34 years. Good to see you again, everybody. A lot of people are forgetting. I've heard and I've tried to catch to what everybody's been saying. A lot of people are forgetting the retirees that are extremely ill, who cannot go out and get another job. You're talking about eliminating post-65 coverage for all retirees. I got a couple good friends right now that can't go out and work. I mean, so here, if you go eliminate that and their spouse, they're gonna have some problems. I'm speaking up for them. And I've heard what this young lady has been saying about as far as post-65 going out and getting cheaper coverage, because there is cheaper coverage out there. But if it is, I'd like to know where it's at. Because my wife will be 70 next year, and believe me, we've called around.
You just go to United.
And you're looking at $400 to $600 difference higher. We call 3 or 4 different companies. So that's what, you know.
How much higher, Chief? How much is that?
It was like $400 to $600 higher. We even call United Healthcare. And from what, you know, with the city contributing and what she's paying, I think she's paying $245 or some odd dollars like that. It was almost $500. You know, that, I'm sorry, that presents a burden. And it's eliminating that's going to affect a lot of retirees and a lot of their families, you know, wives, if they got any families left, which I got a wife and that's about it. But you go put a real burden, and I know I understand the city's got a burden, and I've met with Mr. Rickman before years ago. We didn't agree then, we don't agree now. I'm sorry.
Well, you don't. Well, I mean, that's unfair. I think that's kind of unfair to say that. Because,
Well, I'm
because
sorry.
you don't know where we're at. We're in
I
here
don't.
working really hard.
Yes,
And I'm the one, I think, who brought up the fact that we ought to be looking at not eliminating post-65.
Yes, you did. And on that,
So,
I
I mean,
apologize.
let's be fair. If we're
Let's
gonna,
be fair, you're right, and I apologize for you, with you on that. But let's also think about the retirees who cannot get out there and go to work, who have illnesses. Okay, and there are quite a few. And if you eliminate that post-65 coverage for all retirees, you're gonna present them with a big problem. That's all I got to say.
Yes, sir.
The United Healthcare that we have. To the mic. Is United Healthcare that we have, can that be renegotiated any? Because I find that United Healthcare does not pay much of a benefit or the money to pay. So if I'm wrong on that, y'all tell me, but I get very little out of United Healthcare. I try not to be too expensive. I was to go through rehabilitation, and those people over there was over $1,200 to start off with. I said no, because I could see where it was going. Well, I'll just have to go home and do it myself, you know, because I don't want to be that kind of expenditure on the city or nobody else. That's not my nature. You take care of your neighbor. But anyway, can you renegotiate anything with United Healthcare and maybe get us a little better situation there, or eliminate those folks and put it on the other people? I love my active firefighters. I'm ready to die, you know. I'm 82. So these guys here, and that's the essence of the city, is your good employee.
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do look at our post-65 coverage and try and work with the carriers to get us cheaper coverage. But the reality is we have a very small number of people that we're covering, and they have very high expenses. So the insurance companies really don't want to take on that responsibility. I don't know if it's about liking you. I think it's about the dollars and cents of it all. Because we have a really small population, and when you have a small number, it's more expensive because you have less people, you know, no offense, Pierre, he's an insurance guy, but, you know, it's all about getting in the most participants, and that typically is your cheaper coverage when you have more participants that are in your coverage.
and in that kind of the advantage that we've heard from some other folks about getting into the platform that I don't know if it's ARP, whoever, that has the platform with all, I think there's like 27 different styles of supplement, because that's what we're talking about here.
Right,
for
it's a
retirees,
supplemental. Yeah, 'cause they-
Medicare's first and
it's a
foremost to get
right.
the gap. But, if there is issues with that program, we need to know about that as well as we move forward.
Yeah, but it does
to
supplement
ensure-
Medicare. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is David Chine. I'm with the fire department. I just have a quick question of, with the insurance plan set in place right here, how are we going to recruit? How is this a good means of recruiting and retaining employees? Because a lot of people, they might come in to see this and, it won't be beneficial to me. I give the city 25, 30 years of my life, and at the end of that, when I retire, I'm just going to the wayside. How is this a good insurance plan to retain these good employees on all aspects?
Well, if you've given that much service, then you should probably be grandfathered into that prior to July 1, 2009.
I think he's talking about
exact-
future.
He means perspective. He means perspective. I think he's saying.
Well, that's what I was about to say, but you're exactly right. And that's probably the biggest concern. I was listening to Mayor Benjamin and listening to all of the great comments in here, but the people that are truly impacted by what we're having to do are working right now. They're not in this room able to, necessarily comment with us right here, right now, because they're working. But the fact of the matter is, your retirement eligibility still comes into play too. So that's also what we looked at, trying to balance all this. The reality of it is, you're gonna have to meet that rule of 90. Would you realistically be working for the city 30 years, 25 years? I don't know, maybe
Yes,
so.
ma'am. I completely understand it is a numbers game, but I'm just going to speak, speaking biasly, but with the fire and police and other departments in the city, you put your body through a different strain than anyone else. I've had friends who fell through floors, had ceilings fall on top of them. Police officers go through a strain. 25, you might start out, like my coworker earlier, Mr. Huffstetler, said, he started out at 18, but in 10, 15 years, your body is to a 70-year-old just about. And I just, I know, I just want you all just to consider that.
No, and I will tell you, we're asking ourselves those very same questions, not just in recruiting the best, but also retaining the best, and then balancing that against just real fiscal realities. But we ask those same questions, and I'll tell you, they're never easy to answer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So thank you all.
My name's Jeff Dickey. I retired from the police department last year. I'm probably one of the luckier ones because I'm younger and I don't have dependents. So this is actually, I could probably pay nothing. I have two questions. If your defined benefit was set in 2012 and the insurance costs, we saw the chart have gone up, shouldn't the defined benefit go up?
Yes.
And your liability goes up.
Yeah, well, that's the
way it was voted on was that the defined benefit would stay the same and that the retirees' premiums would be adjusted to increase to keep that DDB the same, which we have not increased retiree premiums to the rate that the cost has increased. So the DDB was set, and we've been supplementing the difference between what the retirees are paying and what the DDB is. And we haven't been maintaining the DDB, actually. We've been paying more than the DDB the whole
But you're
time.
planning on keeping, going forth right now
Well,
with that one?
we talked about maybe looking at adjusting the DDB. I don't know, that might be something that we'll consider.
And my other question is going back to the 20 years with the city, 25 with to be eligible for retirement. What if somebody has their 20 with the city, they're not 55, but they can retire under, say they get disabled? Say they're 52, they've got 20 with the city, haven't met the total years for the state, but they can because of disability.
Disability would be different though, wouldn't it?
Well, honestly, that's a dilemma that we face, that people face right now. Everybody who works for the city doesn't necessarily meet the eligibility for insurance. If they go out, they could have worked here 19 years and get injured, and they got to go out on disability retirement. They're a year short. So we have to make that call every single day. So there are some people who worked here 19, 20 years, and they don't get the insurance, depending on when they came in and when they leave.
But my question is, if they meet the 20 years with the city and they meet the 55, but they can retire disabled, but they don't have the 28 with the state program.
If they're retirement eligible,
With the state.
whether that's through disability or regular retirement eligible, they'll still be eligible for the insurance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they just have to be retirement eligible. So if they meet all the other requirements, then they could be eligible. I hate to make promises because Lord knows y'all will hold me to them. So I'm trying to speak in broad terms because everybody's situation is different. So I don't want to make a promise that I can't keep.
Hey, I'm Brantley Hannum with the Fire Department Retired. I've got a couple small questions. First of all, I appreciate all the hard work y'all doing, and obviously we're frustrated, and it's very understandably why we now have some tighter budgets on the retiree side. We're down to 53%. I heard your note. I've been watching you, and you got your numbers right, half of them. But on the normal percentage, when we're working another year, that comes out to be an average, what we've averaged to about another $50 to $65 a month for the average employee, depending on where you're at. But I just worked some numbers before I left. That's not enough so far to pay for these expenditures. If I have an expense right now, if I lower my wife, if I drop her off her coverage right now because she gets a job, I can't add her on. I can't add her back on in 2 years. And so that's thinking the idea that, hey, if my wife has coverage or my dependents have coverage, namely my wife, will we be able to add her back on if she doesn't have that good job maybe in 2 years? I think that's something we've not talked about yet. But as of right now, if I drop her, we cannot add her back on. If I go to a lower coverage, I can never get the higher coverage. Am I right so far? Good. So we want to see if we can get all that. So if we're talking about being fair and you want to reward me for being a good, maybe a healthier employee or post-employee, as a retiree, I think it would be responsible to add that, whichever the initials were, to carry over. If you're going to give me $1,000 or $1,500, we were talking about would it go over? Would there be a cap? Would it get put back in the big fund? Okay, it would only be responsible to, because I didn't get kidney stones this year, but I'm gonna get them next year. You know what I mean? And so we're only it's a Russian roulette game, and I think that's But if we're saying, hey, part of the new budget is to give him this amount of money, I think it would be responsible to let me keep it in a balance to move forward.
To roll it over?
But
Is
if
that
we're
what you're
gonna
talking about?
if we're gonna take that retiree's wife or spouse and put him or her out because they have suitable coverage, whatever that suitable coverage is, we've got to be able to allow them back in if they lose their job, or with the state if they lose their job. It's got to be a little bit more of a better system. Here's the last thing I want to say, because again, y'all got a tough job, man. I really do appreciate it. I've been watching you for my whole career, and the number one word you have always said is your constituents. Your constituents. Your constituents. And now that's exactly who we are. We're not employees of the city anymore. We're y'all's constituents. And so we're actually the people y'all are going to work for. And it's more than just a numbers game, and it's not just as easy, because the whole time when the rates were going up with insurance, that same 8 years, we weren't getting raises in the city. It was a huge amount of time. And so that's just where we were, and that's not to throw stones, but there's a lot of things. That's 8 years that we weren't able to contribute more to the 401 or the 457 to get to a point where we can handle these extra fees. The last thing is I don't know what it costs to operate some of the different departments or to train them in their positions, but I know how much it costs to train a firefighter. I know how much it costs after 4 months in a recruit school to train a policeman and some of the higher, or your architect that Mr. Vine was talking about, or your engineers. And when we potentially have a mass exodus of the employees that you have right now, because they're saying, hey, this stinks, this is not what I was in for, it's not going to happen to the 20-year employee. This only got 8 to go. But the guys from 0 to 10, whatever that is, I think that should be part of your study. How much extra is it going to cost Chief Jenkins in his budget that he don't have already in the 5-year plan that he just tried to add last week, saying, hey, we're going to be the best in the city. we're gonna be the best over the next 5 years, but I'm staying lower in here because it's costing me so much of my budget, and hey, I need more money, which we don't have because we're spending it on healthcare. There's a lot more parts of the moving parts that we've gotta see. And I think there's more parts of the study because there's gonna be a mass exodus. I'm telling you, it's coming. That's all they're talking about on Facebook. That's all the young guys are talking about. You know, and is that smart that they leave? I'm not saying it is. I'm not agreeing with them because I want them to have that cushion of a pension one day. We don't have a lot of pensions out there, but for the ones that she said it very clear that can go to the private sector, especially some of the mechanics and some of the engineers, some of the architects, and make more money, you can't sell them on the idea because this is why we were here the whole time. When we loved it, and it was a good job for good benefits. Nobody ever got rich with any of the jobs, including y'all's, in the city, ever. But we always talk about the benefits. And it stinks now because when we get to this age, we can't do as much. I think a lot of that ought to play into it, but when we're talking about how much money is going to cost to train the people that are leaving because of this new plan, and it's not just, I know in the first part we said, hey, these guys are not getting charged as much, the active, but they're saying, hey, in 25 years, I need to go make me more money so I can invest properly. If they do or not, but I'm going to invest more money so I can handle my health care in the future. Because this is coming again in 2 years. I mean, we're going to be sitting back at the table. But I ask you that to consider to try to maybe keep one of the lower statuses or some of the lower stuff. And yeah, there's some great questions in here, what we do with our spouse, what we do with that HRA money or, you know, the accounts. But I mean, it's coming. It's coming, and depending on what decisions y'all make. Now, y'all got to make decisions, I get it. And tough job. I appreciate your hard work, I really do. I mean that sincerely. But the decisions that are made next Tuesday night and over this budget concerning this insurance is going to affect how much of your budget is about to get busted. It's coming. And I think the train that's coming down the track is just where we're getting off. But I appreciate your hard work, I really do.
Thank you.
Well said.
Hey, I'm C.O. Clark. I've been here since 1982. And when I came, when, of course, the big pitch was I'd never had to pay for insurance in my life. Well, I can understand that. The world as it changes as it's going on today. Everything gets nothing but more expensive. When y'all are sitting down and thinking about how we're going to proceed for the employees that come in the future and us, I just turned 62. So I'm a pre-65, but in 3 years I will be post-65. So, of course, I'm a little interested in the things that you're looking at with the HCA and HRA, and things. Will the HRA, will y'all be doing a yearly update on that to reflect the actual cost of any increases as year, whether it be good or bad? You know, inflation sometimes go up, sometimes goes down. Will y'all be adjusting that figure on a yearly basis, or is it like the DBB that hasn't changed since 2012?
What's in the HRA will be what the DDB is, whatever
Okay, well,
that's determined to be.
Well, what I'm getting at is, if it's $1,130 for today, if 20 years insurance doubles, will the HRA still stay the same, or will you reflect the actual in costs and the increases for the health care?
We can't raise that, or else it would raise our OPEB liability out the roof.
The numbers would dictate no, it would not adjust, just as we established defined dollar benefit to keep down those long-term liability numbers. However, just as we're discussing here, this council or future councils can determine otherwise, but theoretically the answer would be no, because if you did, then you would obviously be increasing that long-term liability. But that's not that. This council may change its mind in the future, and future councils may as well.
I'm not envious of y'all at all having to make this decision.
Thank you. Any other questions? Vic?
Good afternoon. Like many have said before, my name is Victor Kemper. I'm a fire captain with the fire department. Like many have said before, this is a very difficult time. I understand healthcare decisions are the most terrible decisions. I mean, it affects all of our lives. You guys get health insurance too. You're voting on what to do with your wives and their health insurance and things as well, and I understand that. But I encourage you to, Councilman Rickman talked about an obligation, to continue to think about that obligation for these guys who have come in and fought fire for 20 years ago, and now their bodies are breaking down. That there's got to be a way to find a way to fund healthcare for them, even if that means finding new revenue streams that we've talked about in the past and in the future. I know that in the past you've done SC&G's franchise fee or something like that. I don't know how that would work. That's your guys' field of play, you know. But I can tell you that as it stands, Mr. Hannah was right that if you do change it for active employees or retirees, you'll find that many employees will leave. They'll have no reason to stay. Fire employees and police have the opportunity to work for a different department, and without having those 25 years here, or a reason to stay for 25 years, they can go wherever, and that means the prisons or anything like that. Same with the fire departments throughout the Midlands, and Charleston has just put out applications. So I encourage you to look at those things and think hard. We're the ones who've protected the city for years, and we hope to continue to do so. But we have to pick our families first. So, thank you.
Thank you, man. All right. Other questions from Ms. Benjamin?
I think too, it's.
And guys, I would tell you, those questions and answers are very helpful as well, too.
Got a long
Very-
list.
Very helpful and concerns. Yeah.
Yes, sir. They were very helpful, and, you know, we are constantly doing our homework. We'll go back and do some more, and, you know, I would say, though, that the city is not that much different from other agencies. I mean, you're gonna find a gamut of how people are handling, post-employment benefits and active, and we've been right up there with the best of the best. So I hope and pray we don't see a mass exodus. I would venture to say that agencies similarly situated to us are not necessarily going to be this plethora of healthcare benefits, because everybody's facing the same issues we are. But we hope that's not the case.
Would you like me to,
And sometimes the salary is better for people that live in Charleston, but they live in Charleston. So the cost of living is higher in Charleston.
everything
So
is-
everything is relative
It is.
with that.
Pays more salary-wise?
The health is better, no doubt, hands down.
Well, I'm talking about the healthcare costs. So that's what the issue was about if you leave to get the healthcare.
But you make $6,000 more a year if you go to Western County. That offsets
For the moment.
you're correct. They can change
For the moment.
I think what I'm also speaking of, you got people not just going back to fire jobs or to police jobs, you got people going to find better paying jobs. You know, if it's a little Debbie job, or if it's at Michelin, or if it's at other places that might fit some of their goals. But in the past, when I first came here, no one would leave. And the reason that started changing is we started changing some things, and they were like, hey, why are you looking for a job? Well, it's better out on the other side. And it's not completely better. When they go to change some of those things, you made a comment that is well taken with me. You said, hey, I'd like to think that all those benefits are not just, but they don't know that. They don't know that until they leave and go, and then they sometimes, man, I shouldn't have left. But regardless, they left. It's coming. I'm just telling you, it just depends on, it's coming anyway. Mr. Rickerman made the comment that people don't stay in their jobs anymore. I mean, I don't think the average young person understands the significance of a pension, regardless how much.
That's it.
But
That's true.
regardless, if they do or don't, it's coming. It doesn't matter if they're dumb, or if they're smart, or if they're great, or if they're unadvised, or if they're advised, they're still quitting, which is costing the city money in another area when we're trying to save money. So it doesn't matter why they're going, or if they're smart, or if they're great, or if they're dumb. They're still leaving.
But our
And what can
popular,
we do to retain them? And your plan says, hey, I'm going out and I'm going doing this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Oh, by the way, you got a lot more money that's going to be costing you. And I'm telling you, that's a tough thing when they say, hey, I'm gonna do all this for this long, and I'm gonna be broke at the end, I just think it should play into your thing. Again, I know you gotta do something, something's gotta happen.
Yeah.
I just
Well,
think
part of it's
that
state
has to-
law rules too, and again, we said earlier, we're looking at the population and trying to balance it based off who's truly gonna be impacted, because the state law would say now, you're gonna have to stay, so are people really going to do that if you're gonna meet the rule of 90, for example? So, I mean, there's lots of things that play here other than just because we're gonna make this, whatever decisions we make right now. It's also about other decisions that we have to follow to be retirement eligible. Unless we say you don't have to be retirement eligible, we haven't
Yeah,
said
and
that.
again, you know, retirement eligibility has changed
Correct.
significantly.
Yeah, but
Correct.
all things being said, that is sage advice. And it's good.
It is.
And I just want to encourage you all that we're all having those same conversations. I mean about employee recruitment, about employee retention, about obligations to retirees, about quality of life, about families. I mean, these are not black and white numbers on a sheet. We're discussing all those things, and I would say even the presentation here today is a far stretch from the different plans that have been presented us over time. We're trying our best to take into account all these concerns. But you're right, some of the long-term concerns regarding pensions or the possibilities regarding pensions, a lot of our young employees don't think about that down the road, and they should be a lot more focused on that. But just again, want to make sure y'all know that this is a living, breathing discussion that we're trying to balance some very challenging global fiscal issues that others have decided they're just going to punt on and distance them. Yeah. Oh no, absolutely, and it's helped us. I mean, and we've had I would tell you, we've had a vigorous dialogue amongst council members, individually and collectively, and my guess is we're going to continue to do this more of that. So, but it's been helpful, very helpful. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. The next part of the presentation is regarding the proposed budget. Mr. Mayor and Missy Kaufman, Budget and Program Management Director, will come forward to present the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 proposed budget.
That's what I'm saying. If you shifted the whole thing over. Yep. But I'm not gonna let Rusty go.
I have to tell y'all, they're all, yeah, but, I've retired from the state system. I've got spouse benefits, my benefits, all that stuff. But I'm frugal about how I use the system. And I cannot imagine when I was working, never imagine that one day somebody.
Ms. Ellis, you got me some love all around the country.
Oh, I should have done that at the beginning. She's here.
That was the most.
Which means everybody that's protecting them.
Please do.
They gotta make adjustments.
Okay.
Adjustments to budgets, they gotta make adjustments to what they offer. They gotta make adjustments to whether or not, well, based on what they call or define as being competitive. It's a tough damn bill to swallow. I still don't get this promise.
I will. He gotta log that off.
Oh, no, so you have to click on the button at the bottom, so they don't automatically populate until it's on the comment section, and they show up.
Years ago, but that's how she got into the system.
When you're mad, you want to make yourself even more mad, just to.
And that's a big help, but, that was her choice, to work for the state. And, the state ain't all that, it's okay, but, it's like here today, out in the cold tomorrow, too.
Yeah, all three of y'all have come and said that to me. I will. I should have done it at the beginning. I could have started. Not in my office, but I'll get them for you. I do have some of those Delphi chickens. Hold on. I was thinking about that myself. I was thinking about the same thing, Daniel.
Speaking to your constituents.
Well, we know, hey, we can supplement now. And, the question comes is, do you agree with me that this is my responsibility or this is my responsibility? And that's gonna make the difference. I didn't realize how much we were supplementing.
I don't want to do any of it.
I think if we look at that, I bet we could take care of all the employees.
100% of the employees. Yeah.
Do we,
It's fine.
I think we could.
are we able to say to the employees, these are options for you in the private sector? We don't
To
have
run and go work for somebody else, I mean, private sector is not providing health care
Right.
long-term
Most
either.
of them think it.
I mean, no offense, but
Most of them think it is. Two questions.
Your comment, we think. The basket.
Yeah, your microphones are still on.
Oh. I saw that.
This, oh, it's just the Android.
I think we could look at it, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. Look at the GM, they lost all their. But I think if we could find a way, we could just take care of it. I think it can be done, I bet you if we run these numbers, it can be done.
See, I thought it was only like 10% of.
I guess when everyone shows up.
I'm not clear.
I mean, that's what other practices do. They supplement the employee and if you have a spouse and kids, you pay them, whatever the number is, it is. Search, $100 surcharge doesn't move the needle.
I mean, the spouses. Well, what you're talking about, so let's look at the whole idea about the DDB, if we did away with spouse DDB and all that. At the end of the day, the 1140, 820, whatever it is, that's the amount of money we have to work with. So if we were to take all of that and move it to the retiree, or whatever, and make sure that's accurate. But then that also means work on that.
I could do it. I'm gonna wait, I take that back. Might not be able to do it, definitely wouldn't.
Well, but what about CNBC?
We can supplement, that's why I get frustrated when somebody like Rusty gets out and says something like that. I've been supplementing your spouse for 45 years. And that wasn't the deal.
Found anything I didn't catch in the line item?
On the CPD, man, code enforcement.
36,000.
You can't retire. Not in today's world.
Chief, the thing I told the chief about this, you got 80-something houses.
Any grants?
You got, that's what they.
She can still stay, she can still stay.
Yes, sir.
We have a lot of.
Long time no see. That was a huge.
We started the conversation.
Ah, man. Are we, waiting on?
We were just talking about it.
I'm talking to his neighborhood meeting.
Well, it's also amazing.
it's different too, because we were competing against the private
Have fun.
sector. We're not competing against the private sector
I know.
because they're not offering them.
Who's meeting?
Well, that would be so, it's amazing, it's amazing. I can't This is,
I love the district rep.
He doesn't understand that. Makes it.
I love it.
Ed's gonna ambush
are
you.
gonna stay in the city for, and
I love
50,
it. I love it. I love it.
I mean, they don't hold you guys responsible. They hold us accountable.
we need to do regardless of what happens with healthcare.
And Teresa, we waiting on me or what we waiting on?
Yeah.
Are we ready now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Wow, it's 4 o'clock.
I lost the audience for this conversation, so. No, that's fine. We can keep moving on. We just want to keep going. Today is our final budget workshop before we have the public hearing. The budget has been advertised, both the budget as well as the water and sewer rate ordinance has been advertised. And then the
water and sewer ad was the longest thing I've ever seen.
was that not a big ordinance? It's the whole ordinance. It's the whole.
Who's got the money, the water and sewer people advertising?
Oh, no question.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about the proposed budget. We'll be talking about the general fund. Then we also have our enterprise funds, which is water, sewer, stormwater, and parking, each 3 separate funds. Our special revenues include hospitality tax and accommodations tax. We do not have CIP with us today, but we'll present you all the capital improvement program, which we have a capital improvement program for water and sewer and for stormwater. Those will be ready for you during the public budget public hearing for next week. So just to refresh everybody, where we have landed with our budget is the total operating budget of the general of the city of Columbia is proposed at $346,956,771. Of course, general fund and water and sewer make up the largest. I'm sorry, what was that? General fund and water and sewer make up the largest portion of that budget. Water and sewer is now exceeding the general fund in terms of the largest piece of the pie. As already has been mentioned, this budget has been met with a dose of reality. We're also trying to seek some resiliency in terms of what we're doing going forward and some sustainability. So a number of the decisions and other actions in terms of balance this budget are meeting in both of these areas. Starting with, of course, the general fund. And what we're really doing today is just sort of highlight for you those things that have happened since the last budget discussions. This isn't intended to be a complete overview of the entire budget, which we'll be preparing for the public hearing for next week. So the general fund budget is in balance. At this point, it was advertised at $148,101,152. A total of increase of $5.4 million, about 4%. I want to point out that the largest portion of that $5 million increase, $4 million of that is for the capital improvement program. The capital improvement program is originally targeted at $8 million per year, so we borrow $8 million and then we spend $8 million. In the current year, 17-18, it was only $4 million. So when we adjust it back up to the $8 million, that accounts for that $4 million. If it weren't for that increase in the capital improvement program, the general fund budget would only be increasing $1.4 million. That's less than 1% over the current year budget.
Question on that. The reduction. I guess you know. Will we know what in the capital improvement area is impacted as a result of the borrowing?
So you mean, well, the program that I'm referring to is the capital replacement program, and that's for our rolling stock. Right. And occasionally we also do some technology upgrades, like when we have to refresh our desktops or major heavy equipment. So in this case, what we're referring to for the $8 million is our fire trucks, police cars, garbage trucks, our traffic engineering, boom trucks, it's heavy equipment. It's also some investigator cars, so it's the things that it's just replacement of existing. Occasionally, maybe some new equipment in there, but pretty much it's just to help us retain and or be able to replace our and upgrade or keep our fleet refreshed.
I'm sorry, I was thinking improvement. You're right.
Yeah, so this is capital replacement, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Of course, the budget was balanced without a property tax increase proposed. It reflects funding to maintain our current minimum service levels. In other words, we are maintaining existing operations. This does not take into account reducing operations, nor really expanding upon, nor adding new services. Growth is limited to increased costs for operations, and actually it's even less than what the cost would be in the sense of the CPI. If you take into account, as mentioned, the $4 million that the budget increased less than 1% over the current year. The budget development goals are resiliency, sustainability, and being able to provide quality services that we provide on a daily basis to our citizens and residents and customers.
So, we get into this trap all the time, and, no proposed tax increase, but we are having increases.
Yes. Yes.
Correct.
Yes, that's right. So the increase, what accounts for in other words, the increase is being covered within the increase of the revenues that we have, or by decreasing costs in other areas.
Where are we on attacking the 4,000 parcels?
Actually, we have a little bit about that where we're going to talk about towards the end of the general fund piece, but we can go ahead and jump to there.
I think it's important as we're talking about
Sure.
funding and costs.
Right. So let me go ahead and just jump to that slide and we can come back. So what we have been talking about, we've proposed a couple of different things with you all in terms of some new fees and some other options. What we have found through our discussions is that several of these fees, in order to meet the requirements to be a new fee and not just a tax replacement, is it really needs, bottom line is it needs to cover those things for new costs or new services. So what we are looking at more is some new programs and new activities that we have talked about with you all with regards to our smart city initiatives, some of the public safety enhancements, some of the expansions of our emergency operations, as well as our general capital improvements and our investments in the city infrastructure. So what city manager is proposing is to be able to develop with you a schedule for those continued conversations so that we can bring to you a program that would help us to utilize resources to both for either new resources or reprogramming existing resources to be able to implement some of the programs we talked about. Smart city initiatives to be is one example, or some of the public safety enhancements.
Couldn't you put, if you call it a smart city initiative, couldn't you put some of the public safety enhancements we're looking for in emergency operations all under that umbrella?
Shot spotter.
That's what we're talking about.
That's the
Yes,
goal.
that's the goal. That's the goal. Would you, as you're going through slides, would you reference them by number so Tamika can follow as well?
Yes, I'm sorry. So now we are on, the slide numbers have jumped off. Slides are missing. So now we've jumped to the slide that says future discussions on identifying funding. Let me see if I can number it real quick. Numbers are gone now.
So, back to my initial question. How are we handling those? I think we need to handle those in this budget.
Well, it won't be in this budget because that's to get to what Mr. Duval is also saying is that those would be for new costs and new expenses. So as we put together
Existing 4,000 parcels.
Right, and also
not paying an equal amount. They need to pay a higher fee structure to offset the cost. It is not fair to continue to carry that burden on the homeowners. And the businesses, our commercial districts that are nonprofits are struggling. You look at a triple net lease today, what it's costing somebody, because of the way the tax structure is, and we're continuing to allow this non-tax paying base grow. So what are we doing about it? We have no real growth. So, I mean, our plan this year, we need to overhaul the way we we do business. And I'm talking about DDRC and all these impediments that are continuing to, we're getting complaints about. But we also need to attack. And we're a government city and we're drowning by nonprofits. And so they need to pay a fair share. And we need to address it. It needs to happen now, not later.
So I would love to have included that in the budget. A couple of the items we looked at, we've also gotten some legal advice on, so that's why I'm looking back at Teresa again, but I think the approach we were taking so that we can, do it, and be very, careful about how we do it and what we present to you was to take it sort of under advisement and work it into the discussion that you've asked for with your upcoming budget work. Well, they're not budget workshops, but economic development type workshops, and see how we can roll it in. If we do it that way, though, it would be working towards that in the 1920 budget. But now, unless we're able to get a different answer than
And it's,
given so
And
far.
also
We need another
billing
opinion.
billing it is also gonna be an issue. How do we actually bill the individual parcels for this?
I got a great way. Enhanced water.
that was discussed last time.
Discussed, and so
You pay a
necessarily
premium.
a favored way to do it. Last time we had this discussion, so.
What was that? I'm sorry, what was that? The answer?
So,
Enhanced water service for non-tax paying.
so we absolutely agree. We just, based on the direction that we have and the information we were given, in terms of looking at these fees to be able to cover new costs and new programs, how we structure them is really what we're getting at. And so some of these would be some of the discussions Ms. Wilson's addressed. So we've talked about the street light fee. We've talked about some nonprofit type of fees, impact fee, or
We're struggling.
we don't disagree. Especially in terms of
We're
being able to-
struggling.
Right, please.
We're getting drowned and, we got
So
everything from Bailey Bill to,
have we looked at, and we got a bunch of properties come off Bailey Bill sometime soon too, that's
We
something to
hope.
keep in mind. No, there's no hope where, they are. So the staff, as relates to Daniel's question, have we come up with some different formulae, as to how we might calculate that going forward?
We have formulas for one of them at least, as we've investigated. One of the other ones more for the nonprofit pieces. We've looked at two different options, and so it's really a matter of having just more discussions with you all. in
Enhanced
terms
water
of-
bill was the other one, surface area, or was that, what were the other?
So
choices?
some's a service area, some is basically particular types of services, particular types of services, particular types of areas. To be able to do most of those, you have to have a pretty calculated cost of that service and how that service is getting a higher level of service and what's being paid right now. So it's just the different factors that we're looking at, and then in terms of which direction we go, it's a matter of talking with city council more directly in terms of the directions. Like earlier when we've had conversation, there was maybe not as much of an interest in putting a fee on our water bill, but if it's not on our water bill, to be able to look at something more of a bill
not
type
on
of
our
services.
water bill, their water bill.
Sure.
Let's specify that.
You're right. That's exactly right. So none of these kind of conversations as we've come through.
Yeah.
And I think the idea too, Mr. Rickman, is to not stop. I mean, I don't want you
Right.
to think we're slowing down at all on it. To continue to do the research with all the input we need from legal and everyone else, but to move forward with something in place, say by October, so that you're educating the public. If we were to do it now,
I think
then
that's
it
fine.
would be,
What I
July
don't want us
1,
to do is
people would
wait
say,
till next
"Wait, no, we don't.
fiscal
can't
year,
wait."
because I'm telling you, our constituency they're stumped in these guys. I mean, the commercial,
You guys don't like to talk, don't like when we talk about whether it's student housing tax abatement, other tax abatements. Reality is that our commercial taxes, because of residential property taxes being capped by, the ability to affect them capped by 388, and the disproportionate amount of property not on the tax rolls here, vis-a-vis probably every other city in the state, has led to a significant disproportionate amount of tax burden being borne by our commercial citizens. It's just real, and that grows every time the university or the hospitals or anyone else takes something off the tax rolls, or a church for that matter, taking a shopping center, another shopping center. Yeah, I mean, it's just real, and I mean, it's not subjective. It's objective. It's math, and we've got to be thoughtful as to how we address that. So, and I think I think honestly, even the previous discussion just underscores this one, just being very deliberate and intentional, and coming up with a formula that makes sense. It's fair to all parties involved,
Right.
and to start discussing it as a body.
Well, we will do that post haste. I mean, we've already been working on it, but I don't want you to think just because it's not encompassed in this budget that we're gonna slow down at all bringing the information.
Ms. Wilson, so the projection, if I understand, the projection then is to push forward and look at 2020.
The FY 2019-20 budget. We'll continue to have these discussions with some workshops with you all, economic development matters, et cetera. And probably by October timeframe, have some recommendations in place that we could actually implement with the next budget cycle.
We're not the only person who's tackled this.
And that was proposed, that's what was highlighted in your cover memo, Ms.
Right.
Wilson, in terms of evaluating both revenue, just resources in general, whether it's new revenue streams or existing revenue, reallocations of cost in terms of being able to put forth some of these new initiatives. Obviously, our goal in terms of being able to sustain this budget is being able to maintain the services we have, but obviously, there's a desire, an equal desire to add and grow some of our services and our programs, and being able to identify the resources to do that with. So, and that's going to take a joint conversation with you all for certain. If somebody could help me out with Ms. Devine in terms of the page numbers, I'm going to back up to the revenue slides. I don't know what slide number that is in terms of the complete package because it included the memo as well as the other attachments. I don't know if Erica can see it on the, can you see it on the actual PDF of your screen? Okay.
Missy, I can find the slide number. If you just say the title, I'll be able to find it.
Okay. This is FY 18-19 General Fund, and it's the revenue slide. It's got a bar chart. It's page 22 of the packet. So revenue totals for the general fund are proposed at $129.3 million. That's an increase of $2.6 million, or right at 2%. And of course, the largest increase is in property tax revenues, which are projected at $1.7 million, which is about 3% increase over current year budget. You can see in terms of the way we've stacked our revenues, general fund revenue sources, the primary sources are property taxes, and then, of course, from permits and licenses. Transfers in, the capital lease proceeds is $8 million, which increases, which is the increase, as we mentioned, from the $4 million to the $8 million for the capital lease program, which is our capital replacement program. Then we also have the use of fund balance. We've reduced that from $3 million to $1.7 million. And that was also in order to help sustain our goal of sustainability and be able to use less of our fund balance, which we are also need to make sure that we have the fund balance to be able to meet that through that our targeted projection, 15%. Pardon?
When will we have a fund balance number?
For 18?
Yeah.
Several months.
After we finish the year, and then start later.
Once we can get through the audits, yeah.
So we bid into last year's, the
Already
$3
bid
million
into
you set aside last year. We didn't use.
We don't have, you mean excess fund balance?
That's right.
Yeah, no, we had zero.
Yeah.
finished last year at a slight deficit, what was the number, 3?
It's in the package. It's in the budget package that you have.
Yeah.
It's in the budget that you have in your package. So with that as well, and then too, of course, our 15% target, is based on revenue. So that 15% target increases every year that our budget increases. So going forward on general fund again, looking at the expense side, department budgets total $123 million. Of course, as you all know, as we were bringing the budget forward to you, balancing the budget, the $123 million reflects a reduction of $6.7 million in healthcare costs. That's both from plan design changes as well as liability changes, and from also the credit we are anticipating to receive from state retirement for the increase in the state retirement system rates. Right now, the department budgets that are before you do not reflect that reduction, pending upon final sort of actions on that decision. And so we will adjust department's budgets accordingly. We've also eliminated funding from the department requested budget that has been presented to you over the past several months. We've eliminated $3.5 million in new requests for department programs and services, as well as an additional $1.5 in requested budgets. So those were primarily the items used that were helping us to balance this budget on top of some of the revenue increases that were projected earlier. This does include continuation of the city's pay for performance merit program of $1 million in the general funds portion. That's for the employees in the general fund. Of course, the other funds have funds in there as well for those employees.
Question. What is are we doing a COLA this year or what?
So the proposal is for merit.
Merit. I was looking at the salary ranges and differences on the department budgets. Seems like it was relatively modest, so that's
correct. Right, and those
in
numbers
every department.
Right. Every department's budget will actually end up going down from what's on your list right now, because once we reflect the changes for healthcare. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, and healthcare was primarily the only increase in the department's budget. The cost of living was included in the current year budget.
So, looking at the jail detention, did we ever get the numbers that we requested last October?
Which numbers?
From the county, which
we get monthly
the
information.
Former $1 million director had promised us numbers, because if they're charging us $30 a day, they're saying that we put 20,000 people in jail.
It's per day per person. So if you're in there for 5 days, you get that $25 per person, right? We can give you
$30.
We get a listing every year. It's anywhere from as low as 900 to 1,500.
I guess my
per
struggle
month.
is we've never gotten the paperwork to show what they're charging each entity, because they should be charging themselves the same amount, because we're all paying equally for the jail. We paid for the jail with bonds that the city employees paid. City constituents, taxpayers. We are continuing. I want to see the numbers before we pay them any more money. Every contract that we've had with them, we've been scrutinized and gone painfully through a discussion with them. And never once can we get the jail numbers, even when Kit Smith was on council, and we never could get them. Howard, you might could get them from him, but the rest of us can't.
So we don't, you're saying we don't know what they're charging themselves in terms of
Well, I'm
operation.
curious, are they charging, or are they just charging the other municipalities in it? And, that's double taxation. It's 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it was $230,000. It's $600 today.
Yeah.
Well, we'll try to get that for you.
I don't know who you ask, but
Well, that would be good information to, I don't know.
Ask again, if you can't get it, then Sarah can FOIA it.
She'll send us the bill.
No, let's ask again. Spirit of regional cooperation, like we always do.
We can share some of the information that we get to on a monthly basis. So non-departmentals total 6.3 million. Of that, 1.2 million increase, 23%. The largest of that being the proposed increase for the debt service payment, or the payment for the capital lease program. The current year, we've maintained current funding levels for external agencies, which includes the Alvin Escalin Detention Center at $600,000. That's the current amount in this year's budget. We increased it in the current year to reflect their increase in the per inmate per day rate in the current year, and so far we're able to sustain that amount. Public defender is $100,000. The solicitor is in at $215,000. And then the homeless services maintained at $1 million, which of course that includes 4 different contracts that the city supports with those funds. Transfers out total $17.8 million. That includes $3.2 million increase. Again, $4 million of that is for $8 million of that is for the capital replacement program. It also includes our debt service payments and transfers to the component units. I do want to point out that, again, this year in the budget, there is no funding for capital improvement program for the general capital projects. So, okay. All right. We've already discussed the additional resources. Next is talking about affordable housing. City Council in January adopted affordable housing program. It was estimated that about $350,000 would be from the general fund. What we're proposing is that we would use a portion of yet to be determined savings from this fiscal year, should there be any, for that towards that funding. In the interim, there are funds being used from other grants to help fund.
Can we do an
the program.
SSR credit for housing?
Commercial, if it's commercial, we could and should.
I mean, we keep talking about putting money in these things. Why aren't we creating that same atmosphere?
I think we should. I think the exact same approach we've taken to student housing, we should take to affordable housing. We ought to give folks
Incentive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's no skin off our back, because obviously you're talking about 100% nothing versus a portion of something.
We could do that. That'd be something we do together, but.
That was included in the memo I sent to everybody last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to also still get the county and the school district.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we need to figure out how we can do that, like you do a multi-county, where it's just a county. We're not getting that discussion. They pay the full rate, and then we credit them back, and then that way it's an easy, clean deal, and everybody understands it.
The proposal before was to incentivize mixed use, mixed income housing, and if we did it as commercial, then yeah, it would qualify for whatever tax abatement we have attached to it, if it was the 50% for 10 years or what have you, but try to really aggressively go after, what we want, not what people want to give us. I think you create that environment. I think you'll see the same type of, because especially
if you make them pay the 6% and you credit it back, then they actually got to deliver it.
And then they'll also get the potentially the 4%,
right.
Program through state housing. I mean, you could really let's just create a tool and just put it out there and see what happens. We wind up with
this is
with
what
more,
we can do.
or,
Here
yeah,
it is.
yeah. I mean, and again, it's no money out of our pockets. We just create the environment and see what the market will bear. I think people will rush in with housing. We can incentivize the 60% to afford 6% to 120% AMI if we want to. I mean, you're capturing working families all the way up to ambitious young professionals or what have you. Again, that was in the mix last year, and the thought then was let's see if we can incentivize it heavily and all across the city. I mean, so we're not concentrating in one district. Let's see if we can find four areas and all across town. And if you tell people what you want and what you're willing to incentivize, not just what they want to bring, then I think you wind up with much nicer product, and it'll be borne by the private sector, not by the public sector.
And that's the difference. Excuse me, Slim, go ahead.
Right.
That's the difference between doing the student housing abatement versus what you're talking about. Us coming up with areas that we want developed and the type of development we want and incentivizing that. I can go with that. I can't go with student housing.
Well, that was on. We put it back on the table again. I don't mind. Let's refresh that memo. But it's important to note that the first round of student housing we did a couple of years ago, while it may not have been location specific, it was very specific in what we were willing to incentivize in terms of amount invested, in terms of design and review and the like. And I mean, it was very specific. It was not location specific. But no, I think again, it's telling people what you want and not making it overly restrictive, so that there's no opportunity to earn profit there. So the private sector doesn't want to come there. But let's build a mousetrap and get the heck out the way, and let's see what the private sector will bear.
Yeah. I had a guy that called me last week, said that he's got, I think there's federal dollars for affordable housing, and I think also they were looking at single family models. The mix includes rent to buy. You know, that's kind of iffy sometimes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But everything else I'm seeing out there on the internet is a lot of these cities are in fact looking at affordable housing, mixed income, and also they're using it as one of the launching pads for redevelopment. It's really tied in, not just housing, but a redevelopment plan, a redevelopment strategy for parts of cities and municipalities that need and are struggling with redevelopment. Okay. I think if we do that, that's the way to go for me, and that's kind of what I'm hearing out there. People don't say it to us, but going back to what some of our weaknesses are and how we're struggling, they don't say it, but they see it and they recognize it, and they're kind of wishing that we do something about it.
Missy,
So I'm on board with that.
On your slide there, you talked about taking the $350 that we don't have available in the general fund, but maybe funding. You talking about just that $350 with savings on the health plan, or are you talking about all the savings on the health plan?
All savings on the general fund budget at the end of the year. Right. Not just healthcare savings. Like once we complete the year, fund balance, use of fund balance.
With a surplus.
Okay.
And you come with
That
an
would be one of
incentive.
the first items.
And you come with an incentive and you sunset it on day one. If it's a good incentive, you'll find some activity there.
So can I just add to the discussion on SSRC, because if we're going to do something like this, because we are 17.9% of the total tax millage, we will really need the county and the school districts as a partner. So we're gonna have that discussion with them, because housing, it depends. You know, when you talk affordable housing with them, they have said recently that's a big priority of theirs, but when we've had discussions a year ago, when Ryan and I met with them to talk about something similar to this, that included parking, and with it, the feedback we received was they weren't interested in doing this with housing. They were interested in doing it more for commercial. So has that changed? I don't know. Rain Living would indicate at least it's changed for someone over there. But those are the county. So those are, we're gonna have to start those conversations and really bring them in.
Well, I don't think it's fair to use that as an example, because we all know that there's another incentive behind that.
What are you gonna do with the savings on healthcare? For the 17-18 budget.
That's,
Was that?
There are no savings in the
Fairness.
17-18 budget. The changes we're making now don't go into effect until January 2019.
18-19,
Yeah, okay.
18-19.
That would be this. That's what helped balance. Remember, the budget was $15 million shortfall.
And you're gonna make that up by the savings in the.
Combinations of the healthcare, reductions to departments' budgets, and revenue adjustments.
Okay.
So the savings in the healthcare have already been programmed into this budget.
Yeah, well, the healthcare is because of reduction of liability and costs that you're.
Correct. It's both cost.
You don't need to say the way it's being stated.
right.
Not correct.
You're not reducing healthcare. You're not reducing
That's
healthcare.
what's in a
We're not reducing
mechanism.
healthcare.
Yeah, you're not reducing healthcare.
We're not reducing healthcare. Savings in the cost. Okay. Any other questions on the general fund?
Keep on going.
All right, so next we have our enterprise funds, starting with the water and sewer budget. Water and sewer budget is 106, the revenues are 160,167,000. The actual total water and sewer budget is 161 million, but those are the actual revenues for operating revenues. And it does include a rate adjustment of 9.76%. In terms of our department budgets, 71% of the budget is for our utility operations. That includes our water and wastewater crews. That includes our plant operations, both water plants, both wastewater treatment plants, and as well as the activities spent on those services. Outside of our department budgets, the next largest item would be for debt service, which is 22%. So out of the total budget, 58% is for our utility operations, our total department operations, and the next would be debt service on the capital improvement, on the bonds for the water and sewer capital improvement program. Again, the budget is proposed at $161.9 million. It's an increase of $9 million or 6% over the current year. It does reflect a rate adjustment of 9.76%. It maintains the capital improvement program for water and sewer as $120 million. That includes $21.5 million that would be funded from cash out of this budget. The remainder would be coming from bond proceeds. Of the capital improvement program, $80 million is programmed for wastewater improvements and $40 million is programmed for water improvements.
What's left on the water improvements?
What's
From
left?
that- Yeah, from the dissent decree.
You mean on the
Dollar-wise.
wastewater?
Yeah, no, what water? You know, water was 150 million and the balance of it was wastewater from the dissent decree.
Yes, sir. We're, if I'm understanding your question correct, you're asking how much more investment we need to get out of our consent decree. So, the latest projection we've got, the $750 million figure that was ballparked when we got into it, is about where consent decree driven, that's where we're projecting to end up. Now, we're making other investments as we need to above and beyond.
We have to.
Consent decree requirements are. So, I don't have the figure of how much is left, but that outlook over the 10-year projection is looking like it's going to be in the ballpark and relatively correct. We're about to embark on a fairly aggressive, even more aggressive program of capital improvements in our collection system. That's where our next big spend is going to be. We're in construction with some big projects at the wastewater treatment plant, digester upgrades, train one aeration, NPDES permit compliance type. But a lot of our major assets, we have done the condition assessment and inventory. We're developing that list of priorities and we'll be rolling those projects out.
in our early cost estimate for those and the spend moving forward is, over the next 5 years, $80 million a year on the wastewater side, and then reducing down, I think we showed that last time, reducing that number down a little bit. Does that answer your question, Councilman? Okay.
So moving on to our stormwater program, the stormwater budget is, of course, the revenues from the stormwater system are funded from the stormwater fee. The expenditure for that is Public Works makes up 30% of the budget. Engineering is 22%. We now have in this budget debt service and reserve since the new program to invest in the capital improvement program of $93 million over the next several years with using
Engineering's
bond funds.
100% based on our stormwater plan, 22%.
22% of the department, in the engineering department. 22% of the budget funds is the engineering department. Staffing is the program from the engineering budget. So that includes the, go ahead.
I'm sorry, in our engineering department, that houses our stormwater compliance, our MS4 compliance program, so that stormwater group, yeah, thank you, Miss, that stormwater group is housed there.
Okay, so the budget for stormwater is $13.4 million, an increase of $836 or 6.6% over the current year. The capital improvement program for this year is $10.3 million, with a total projected CIP of $93 million over the next 3 to 5 years. As you are aware, the stormwater program manager was contracted for in March, and the bond ordinance was approved in April of $50 million. So this program is helping to fund that program moving forward. The stormwater fee that was adopted last year will increase 74 cents per ERU, which is the equivalent residential unit. So the rate will go from $11.80 per month to $12.50 per month. That's for typical residential unit. Of course, commercial is on a ERU based on their impervious area. Next is our parking fund budget. The total parking fund budget, majority of those revenues come in from street meters. Actually, garages and lot makes up 39%, and then our street meters makes up 34%. And then non-moving violations are 25% of that budget. Expenditure-wise, it's split about 37% for parking services and 33% is debt service. And then parking facilities is 17% of that budget. The total budget is proposed at $8.6 million, which is an increase of $684,000 or 9% over the current year budget. Revenues from parking garage and lots, of course, make up the majority. There will be included some scheduled paintings of the garage, some garages, as well as continued improvements in customer service and continuing to partner with our economic development areas to attract businesses to downtown. Next, we have our special revenues, starting with our hospitality tax budget. Hospitality tax is proposed at $12.1 million, which is an increase of approximately $557,000 or 4.8% over the current year. Revenue collections are in line with current year projections, so we are feeling pretty confident about that 4.8% increase proposed for next year. The budget that is given to you right now just reflects the current amounts by each of those different categories of the amount that's funded for the hospitality tax committee, the amount to the line item agencies, and then the amount to previously approved allocations from City Council. We've not made any indications about how much you may want to move around within that budget for those areas, other than, of course, debt service and then the transfer to the general fund of $3.7 million. And again, some of those allocations are already pre-approved. They were approved by council earlier. So at this point, it's just a matter of the budget allocations. I think they're still needing some direction from City Council with regards to how we actually disperse those funds or how you actually want to disperse those funds.
And the committee recommendations have been made, but I asked Erica you won't see them on your draft agenda for the 5th. I think maybe we need to get this feedback and put them on for the 19th. The committee recommendations for HTAX.
Are we having a follow-up discussion about age tax?
We are, but it won't be before you would be
So,
necessarily.
well, I mean, you know, I got questions.
Those are all your questions, my goodness.
Let's don't have it this afternoon, I gotta
Have the individual
six.
application.
Yeah, some of these, and it's just simple autos, but I mean, I think that, you know, I think before we move forward, and I know there's a push to try to do, but I mean, I think we really gotta decide on how this money is spent. You know, what these groups, I mean, I've looked through and I've highlighted some reimbursables that are questionable and that we paid. Most of the 990s aren't up to date, and we're allowing them to get money. We've got to change the system.
Well, Dee Dee's been working really hard through the committee process, and as she's worked through that, I think she's found even more recommendations. So I was trying to give her time to get through that, put all her recommendations together, and have a work session discussion on it. So timing-wise, you know, obviously some of the bigger discussions do sit around these line item agencies.
Well, you know, they're all gonna be lined up here July 2nd, looking for a check.
Well,
I can,
would your preference be to have the discussion on June 19th during the work session?
Suits me. I mean, I'm gonna ask, Dee Dee to pull some more stuff, because I just think as we have this discussion, we gotta decide what the guidelines are, cause it seems to be a little loose. You know, and if we're gonna make changes, I think Howard has some suggestions that he would like to implement, and, you know, I think we also gotta decide, I mean, does this become the clean and safety fund, you know? Or does it become, you know, we pushing to grow, and
Sure.
what are the accountabilities that we're holding people to, not just on the reimbursable, but deliveries? I mean, they're supposed to help increase the pot. And the reason the pot's increasing now is because we're having more restaurants opening up.
So I guess my question for you all then, just for the sake of direction, we can pull together the presentation for the June 19th work session. And then you could, we're about to talk about your summer calendar, but you could either put them on for the evening meeting, committee recommendations, if you're trying to do that quickly. Or we could do I was gonna push your work session on H-Tax more into the August timeframe and just let you make your recommendations as, you know,
How do we
up or
do
down.
that for funding? Because they all look for funding. I mean, once July
Well, that's what I
1
was
comes.
saying, I wasn't necessarily going to assume you were going to factor in any changes for this round
Well, I mean,
of approvals.
yeah, I mean, I think we have to discuss.
So if you're talking about discussing it before you approve these,
I'm not
You
going
are?
to vote for the age tax the way, by
Okay.
just funding a group that we haven't really set out some guidelines on.
Howard,
then we would
in
need
your
to
leadership,
be more
have
aggressive.
you been sitting with the committee folks?
No,
What about the outline, the recommended structure that we discussed? The
Well,
Whitehead
Mr.
plan.
Mr. Rickman has different opinions of that, and I think we need to have a work session to let us debate where the council wants to go on it.
Well, between the two of you, I would, I'd like for us to do that a little sooner than later, because, you know,
I'm right here anytime you want us.
we're approaching the point where dollars are gonna be recommended or divvied out.
On
And-
both sides.
Yeah, and so some of those concerns I still have, and I would be interested in seeing which, again, entities are
Yeah.
honestly getting what they requested and those that are requesting and getting nothing.
Well, I think the council needs to, there's a difference of opinion on the administration of the H-Tax, and we probably need to have a work session to work that out.
Right, and so my only question was, do you have that work session before you vote on the committee recommendations that are about to be before you? Or do you make your way through the committee recommendations that are about to be before you so that they're not held up until August timeframe, and then have your work session in August?
I think everybody wants to have them before we
Okay,
grant.
so if that's the case, then we're looking at probably the next council meeting realistically, because we're about to talk about your summer schedule where you're not meeting in July. So if you don't wanna,
State law says you gotta meet.
okay, well, I'm gonna need a little guidance then on how you wanna handle that. So if you wanna have your work session on HTAC, then perhaps you could have that as your work session in July. And then vote on your
Well,
committee recommendations.
I know that a lot of people don't want to meet in July, but if we can get 4 people together and have a meeting that maybe does a consent agenda and whatever routine things that we can do that night just to meet the requirements of the law, I'm sure there's 4 of us that'll be in town.
Okay, well, I've gotten lots of different feedback on that as far as your schedules go, so, well, that's next on your agenda, so I don't wanna jump ahead. But I guess if you want us to move forward with your work session item, we can squeeze it into the June 5th work session. The June 5th work session's gotten pretty tight, but I can maybe move something off and put
I'll be
that on.
phoning in.
Well, let's don't do it when you phone it in. You need to be sitting at the table for that debate.
I'm out. There's nothing I can do about it
How
that
about
day.
the 19th?
I'm here the 19th, I'm here the 11th, I'm just out the 5th.
Okay,
How about
so-
the 19th?
And that's fine. I thought what I was hearing is that you wanted to vote on the recommendations too. So is it realistic to think you would work through your discussion of guidelines and all that during a work session and then vote on the spreadsheet that evening? You're good with that?
I wouldn't think so. What do you think, Danny?
I don't know why we couldn't. I mean, I think part of the questions I have may be that create some internal, you know, how do we approve $1,400 worth of gift cards on a reimbursable? To me, I don't understand how that happened. You know, how are we dishing out this money? And I think we need to have that conversation.
We could be real ambitious and I mean, grind it out. If you want next week, it'd be nice to have HTACs, not before us, you know, for the better part of July or August like it has been in the past, and get it done so everyone has some certainty. If we can grind it out, I'm not sure how we do that if Daniel may not be in the room. And it also may just require some, you know, clear articulation of what the rules might be, again, and then of course make sure we have some enforcement of those rules.
Is there a possibility of having another meeting in June, like today's meeting, where we just have a work session in the afternoon when Daniel's gonna be around?
I would say June and July are both very difficult for me.
And most people it is.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it requires clerk and Teresa and Shanique usually get to
I mean, I don't
juggle
mind
those-
being on the
juggle those
phone. That
pins.
doesn't bother me.
I think we can push through it if y'all have the, you know, wherewithal to go.
I just think we've got to
dedicate the time on the 19th during the
We
work
got to
session.
create a clear line of how this money's supposed to be spent and what we expect of it from people.
And that's not necessarily going to impact your, I mean, it may or may not, your decision-making on the committee recommendations.
May not at all. You're absolutely,
I
but it
mean,
may.
It may, I don't know, but your guidelines that you talk about, say you do it on the 19th and we have the committee recommendations on the agenda that evening,
But I think it's important that we don't give any even committee money out if their paperwork's not up to date. You can't be 2 years behind on 990s. Not when you're getting,
What's that?
On June 19th?
June 19th, afternoon, the committee
I don't know
recommendation.
that's our
So we're
regular
here, we're
meeting.
here? Yeah. I mean, we can grind
Put
it
it
out.
on the 19th and have the thing on the.
Come in 2 hours
Pack-
early, let's
pack
just
some
come at
snack-
noon.
Pack some snacks. Let's do it.
I think you definitely can do it. I guess what I was trying to make sure
It's
you
June-
I wasn't understanding you to say that based off whatever guidelines you come up with in the work session, we would need to have then
19th.
gone through the committee backup material to see if those decisions, you know, the recommendations are impacted by, if you're saying, you know, gift cards can't be expensed and someone has done that. I mean, we're not gonna literally have the time to have gone back and given you any guidance on the
I mean, we,
committee's recommendations.
yeah, I think it could be clear, because, I mean, I think then it becomes part of our role in the reimbursable. I mean, we shouldn't be paying for workers' drinks. That's the same thing the sales tax people were trying to scam. That's not, you know, we're not buying Mountain Dew and water for your workers, or toilet paper.
Well, that would be the going forward on the reimbursables. Again, if you all see the recommendations and you do what you normally
Again,
do
it's-
and decide that you're gonna fund things or not, that's
I
the
think we could do it.
going forward on how we.
The funding is
expense
only,
it. Yeah.
the funding is only based on what they actually, the amount what they are allocated is different than what they may get reimbursed based on
But
what's
I
submitted
think we
that's
have to-
eligible.
We have to agree one
Right.
way or another, because
Oh, yeah, we need to agree on
Howard's
what the parameters are. Yes.
recommendation is different from that.
So yes, we need to agree on what the parameters are. We need to enforce those going forward. And obviously, we'll always maintain the prerogative of looking back and determining, you know, how we treat applicants accordingly, you know, based on prior decisions made. We can do that. But yes.
Okay.
All right.
June 19th, H-Tac.
We can climb the hill.
Okay, no problem.
Lengthy discussion on the 19th.
June 19th.
Okay, so final budget we have for you is the accommodations tax, and it's proposed at 2.5, almost 2.6 million.
You talked with John Whitehead lately?
It's approximately 369,000, or 16% increase over the current year.
You gotta make that work.
Oh, Lord, have mercy.
Table it. I'd rather try to make it.
The accommodations tax, of course, the majority of the accommodations tax, 95% of it is allocated, or 30% is allocated for advertising and promotion of tourism. 65% is allocated for tourism and related expenditures. We've not, of course, made recommendations specifically how those funds would be expended to the two groups that typically receive those funds. As far as the 5% general fund purposes, or general purpose funds, which you have used previously to fund One Columbia, a portion of One Columbia, as well as the Together We Can Read program. And of course, $25,000 is an automatic transfer to the general fund, and that's that's the first allocation straight out of the state law. Any questions about accommodations tax? The last item is just mentioning the budget as discussed. Next week is the budget public hearing, first reading, and of course, our open house, where we will have departments presenting information about their services and programs that they provide. That will be June the 5th. Public hearing is scheduled for 6 p.m., the 6 p.m. meeting, rather. Second reading, June 19th, in which you've just now added additional items for discussion. June 19th would be the second and final reading. Thank you all for your patience and diligence and commitment to this process.
Digging deeper into the presentation a little bit between now and then. But thank you. Thank y'all. Good job.
Welcome. Thank you.
Has Pam got, Pam, you got your list of things to review?
After.
Oh, it's gonna be worse.
Hey, I want a raise. We were trying to
Want to
figure
go
out
over
the other
your
day.
list with
Well,
us as
the
far
big
as your?
thing-
The state house.
Daniel might have more, but the couple of things I had was, looking at the possibility of removing spouse coverage in the, current workforce if they have creditable coverage.
And the retirees.
If they had coverage.
Okay.
And I think the captain, the chief, retired chief, had a good question about spouse coverage. If a spouse has creditable coverage and then for some reason loses creditable coverage,
Do you bring them back?
can we bring them back?
Right.
Now, last year, we changed, was it last? Yeah, last year we changed it, the start of this, or was it last? Was it the year before? Yes. So starting in 2017, we made a change that you all voted on that would, once they go off, once they leave here, they have to keep the plan that they have, and they can go lower, but they can't go higher. And they have to, the people that are on their coverage when they leave, then those are the people that they can keep, they can't add. And the reason why we were doing that is because a lot of people were getting married, and they were adding people after they were retired. Some of them adding people because they were sick, and they were seriously. So we were like, you can't just add people kind of willy-nilly. So if they had a spouse when they left and they got a new spouse, I guess you could switch your spouses. But that's the reason why we made that change. I mean, if y'all want to change it again.
They can.
Well, I mean, I think the question comes down to is if the spouse leaves, and let's say in 5 years she's worked somewhere, she's had insurance with them, she doesn't have any more, she gets laid off. Let's say she works at a big utility that goes out of business.
In the middle.
Well, I mean, let's say everything. I mean, really, honestly, because it gets down to eligibility rules, and there's always a circumstance. I deal with it every single day of my life. Somebody's got some circumstance that we have to be careful that we do something consistently.
What would be our general rule on that? Mine is looking at.
That you can't come back.
Again, when you all made the change in 2017, it was that whatever coverage level they left with, they could go lower, but they couldn't go higher, and that they could not add any additional dependents after they left. So hypothetically, anything can happen. I mean, I'd love to create a rule for everybody, but it gets to where we have to kind of manage this whole thing.
Well, the big one for me would be to see what impact removing spouse coverage from the existing employees would have.
Okay.
It's just an interesting, of course, there's several sidebars that happen here. And it usually precipitates a pretty decent back and forth between Ms. Duval and Ms. Devine. We start talking about spouses and family coverage. I appreciate it, first of all, appreciate the work the staff's done with our consultants, and appreciate the discussions that council has had amongst ourselves around health insurance. I really appreciate the input of our employees and retirees. I found it edifying and passionate, but still helpful. And I felt even better that all the situations that were brought up to us, we contemplated in our own discussions as well. It means we can have a well-rounded discussion, but we do need to spend a lot of time looking at the consistently evolving nature of healthcare coverage, the constantly shifting sands of exactly how you provide long-term benefits to your employees, and again, continue to refocus our efforts on our employees and our retirees. Let's look at the entire package, but obviously our long-term responsibility rests with the people, the men and women who work for us every single day. And it's not onerous to ask a spouse if you have optional coverage somewhere else to use that coverage, as opposed to our
Well, it's
guys'
not,
plan.
it's not even just the coverage. It's that we have been supplementing a spouse to almost the level of what we supplement an employee.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's not sustainable.
So if you
And
feel-
had, the gentleman who spoke earlier, his wife has been able to do that for 40 years. If we had all of that funding back in, we may not be having this discussion. Something to think about. But our obligation is to them, you're right,
to the employee.
not to,
And I think the process that we've gone through has shown that that's our focus. So, thank y'all.
What are any other items that, you
want
all
to-
recall from the discussion that we need to research?
Have you given us that thing printed out, or is it all electronic? Yeah, I'm speaking at
Let me go.
6 o'clock tonight.
I think you put it all up there.
I need to make sure that my list is the
Yeah,
right list.
the other items that I noted, just some clarifications about pre-existing conditions and disabilities.
The retirement, getting
If
some real clarity.
If the account can carry over the funds, if that's just a decision we have to make or
Let's
not.
let's look at the numbers, and I mean, and maybe they, yes, they can carry over, maybe for a period of time, maybe year to year, maybe 2 years, whatever it happens to be. I mean, I think there ought to be some ability that to hedge that liability if I'm not sick this year, but I'm sick next year, but not in perpetuity.
Was the consensus regarding post-65 coverage, to move forward with the HRA account for that group?
And to keep the DDB for the post-65?
Mr. Rickman said combine the two, the HRs, HRAs into one HRA.
Combining the active,
He said post 65.
retiree and the spouses is an option. Post-65, do we keep the post-65 and maintain them as a DDB with the
No, we
HRA?
look at HRA
So
account.
HRA, but it's a DDB.
It's still a DDB
Still a
Right.
for the
DDB.
HRA.
At $300 is what they currently are, what their DDB is for us for $300. But the question is it every retiree in the system, or is it those folks that are in it as of December 31st, and then that's where the line is drawn?
Oh, you have to draw the line. I mean, we can't provide benefits for the future at this point. New hires would not have that opportunity.
Pre-65, pre-65, he might pre-65.
They get post-65.
When they turn
I'm 64
post-65.
today, I'm 64 today, and I turned 65 this year, and I'm a retiree, will I have 65 next year when I turn 65?
Or I might be
Right.
55 today.
Yeah,
but
I'm
I still
55
get
today.
post-65 10 years from now. Do we want to fund that, to pay for that through a HRA at the DDB?
Right.
The population as it is that was presented.
That's
I mean, that's what we're asking.
But those are the questions we have to answer when council's here. I mean, not everybody's here. That's a discussion point.
So the population we've talked about now includes everybody hired before 2009. That population, what was presented, did not include a post-65 coverage.
Right.
So now we're saying post-65 would continue for existing retirees in the plan. Obviously, new enrollment drops December 31st.
Right.
So if you're not enrolled by
But
December 31st.
currently in the plan.
And you weren't hired before 2009,
Yep,
no HRA.
correct.
or DDB.
That's my understanding.
Okay. What about the age requirement?
I'm sorry, finish asking your questions first. What was that?
The age requirement, the 55? Is that something you guys want to?
That just reflects what, I mean, kind of marries it up to state law Rule 90, right? I mean, is that what we're?
No, that's just our own, it didn't have anything to do with that.
It's not as aggressive as.
55, 55.
Rule 90 is a lot more aggressive.
Well, they're 55, 35, is that right?
Yes.
That's the rule of 90.
Right, 55-35 would be the rule of 90.
Yes. We have mean, we have several folks who can retire fairly young, so that was just a thought as to adding that, but I do see there's gonna be some angst with that one, adding the age. For folks that we were basically saying we're gonna honor if you were here prior to 2009, but then we're adding another caveat on top of it. I mean, back then, when we said that you would get retiree insurance through the city prior to 2009, there was no age requirement attached to it. It's just if you made 20 years, then you would get it. And so when we
As long as it was available.
yeah.
I mean,
you
well,
were-
I mean, we
well,
can-
that's with
You were
everything.
retirement
That's with
eligible
anything.
as well. I mean, you had to be retirement eligible.
Correct.
You had to be retirement eligible.
Yes.
That's why.
With
and
any
that's
of
been said
this,
several
you
times.
have to be
That's been said
retirement
several
eligible.
times. It
It's
didn't make any
very
sense to me that we would make lifetime obligations to someone at 39 years old.
No, they would have to be
Maybe
retirement
38
eligible.
years old. Okay.
Right, they have to be
But
retirement eligible.
there are some people.
But there are some people.
Oh, certainly. Oh, certainly. Absolutely.
Yeah, there are some people who are really young when they're retirement eligible.
Would be retirement eligible.
But,
Like
that
the
that goes
lady-
back to the
Early
question
40s.
is
Right.
if they can get credible insurance from their other thing, because, I mean, in today's world,
No one's
it's,
going home.
nobody's gonna retire at 47 and never out work another day. Ain't gonna
43.
happen.
Not work.
43.
That's what she said.
There's no way.
Maybe. No. Well, I
Be
don't know.
working
I
till
mean,
I'm 88.
That was her example anyway, and so there may be other examples like that.
And I
The
won't have
reality
any
of it
healthcare.
is something different. That I guess what I'm conveying to you is at July 1 of 2009, prior to that, the rule was if you're retirement eligible and you serve the city for 20 years, you would get the insurance upon retirement.
You'd have the opportunity to get insurance. You don't get it if you don't have it.
Well, yes. That's with
Just to
all of us.
clarify.
That goes without saying with everything we're talking about. But I think we're adding on the age requirement. The age requirement back then there was no age requirement. So I was just trying to explain to y'all why
How much is that population? How much is that population
Largest what population?
that we guess?
What's the
that we
number?
guess would fall into that number of those who were here pre-2029 would not be retirement eligible by state standards, but would also still potentially exceed the 20-year threshold.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I mean, we can look at what cover.
No, you can tell.
We can look at the
a bucket
time.
of a bucket. So just-
Right,
just
and we can
curious.
look at the time people have with us, but we may not be
Capture
able to
everything else.
capture
Capture
all of their
everything else.
other eligibility, because they could have worked for a state agency, they could have
Sure.
worked anywhere else. People meet eligibility at different
many different- oh, yeah.
points. It's so many different points. Everybody's situation is different.
Part of the purpose of doing this with the July 1st, 2009, because there was a natural market indentation already on our books.
We
But the
made
other-
a change before.
Right. The other mark is, of course, the 2014 state requirement, which I'm not sure if a lot of current employees are, how much they register, that whole Rule 90 piece.
Nobody registers
Well-
it
So
until
it's
they
just a
get
matter-
ready to
So it's a
retire.
matter of, so in other words, it's a matter of where do you want to draw the line of demarcation? If we're going to draw the line.
And keep in mind, no matter where we draw that line,
Somebody's
there will be five
not-
stories
exactly.
that walk up there and tell you all like they did today. That's
Yeah.
just going to happen no matter what. If we change to 55 and it goes away, there's still someone that came in on July 2nd, 2009 that's going to say.
Exactly. If I had to been
So
here the
there's-
day before,
no matter
I
where we
would
draw a
have.
line, we just need to know there is a group of somebody that's going to be right at that edge that's going to come up and say,
Always.
we'll never be able to
I
cure
mean,
it.
but I guess what the council is asking though, is it enough of a, I mean, is it the savings gonna be that much of a difference? I mean, because it wasn't a requirement. It wasn't before 2009. So if we add that on, what are we accomplishing by doing that?
Was it something
Create
we
that.
Jeff for the
55,
future?
That was part of the calculation on what the liability was going to be. I can't tell you what that amount is.
For future.
For our future liability, yes. Like changing it to 55, because he also had us change it, he bumped up, one of the options,
And
which,
2
because we did
years
the 55,
additional.
was just bumping everyone up 2 years as well. So there's a dollar amount to it, I don't know what that amount is. So
Yeah, but
if
he
we-
did that before we went back and changed and added the 2009. Did he not? I mean, the age thing wasn't, we
The
came
age
up with
thing-
this.
The age
That
thing was
wasn't-
before the 2009.
Right.
Because we had already, Eric had already, one of the options, 3B, well, 2, 3, and 3B added the age requirement. And it added an additional 2 years of eligibility requirement. Which we didn't add that. So if you had to have 25 years, you'd have to have 27. If you had to have 28, you'd have to have 30. So we didn't add that plus the age.
And I think part of what's also, there's two different pieces of this decision. One is the maintaining of the DDB. That was really the first decision that needed to be made. If council was willing to maintain that DDB. Because then after that, then it's a matter of, okay, then what do we do with that DDB? So the option that the path we've gone on is maintaining DDB through an HRA. If they were to maintain the path of staying on the city's insurance and covered under our plan, then their premiums, as you recall from September, really got lopsided. Of course, that will, fluctuates with the DDB, be flat. So that's really sort of what we're looking at. So what we're trying to figure out now in terms of how we can calculate it all is just working with them what we have as the DDB, because then that's gonna absorb, we're no longer paying the claim, so what we're assuming is this dollar amount is this dollar amount. What will fluctuate is the number of people in that plan. So, in any given year, I mean, there were some projections in Eric's numbers early on, further out, that there may be another year there's a spike in the number of retirees in the plan. But right now, what's giving us the savings is that we're assuming a certain number of folks in the HRA getting the DDB at that dollar amount we projected today, or starting January.
And I guess all I'm saying is, does it make that much of a difference, being that he had factored that in, and then we went back and tweaked and said, put in the whole pre-2009 things. I don't
We
know that
haven't gotten back any numbers from him on the 2009, and it might not, but the age and the years of service make a difference for how long a person stays on the plan. So if they are 40, they're gonna stay on it longer than they will if they're 55. So that was the whole point of that.
I would
To
think
the
the plan
actuarial
that
number.
Eric said, and y'all have tweaked for 55 in 2009, just like it's stated in the presentation. On the DBDs, Daniel, you want to review the spouse DBD?
I think we need to get all of it on the table. We need to know what the numbers are.
Well, in that case, it might be a matter of the DDB. If you look at the combined amount of DDB, that number isn't changing. Like if you add the retirees amount with the spouse's amount, then it's still the same.
Yeah.
But if you
One person will get more and one person will get less if you keep the same amount.
But my question is, my overall question goes to, why are we supplementing a spouse? They didn't work for the city. And in this scenario, what you showed in numbers is that we're supplementing close to 75% of their thing. And to me, our obligation is to the person who worked here. If they want to have coverage, there's a cost to that coverage. And that's what it is. And we had this discussion in 2008, and everybody was like, no, no, no. But the reality is, had we just done that formula, then we wouldn't be having this healthcare discussion.
actually some of the prior conversations we've had with retirees was reserved for us.
Well, it's one of the gentlemen I talked to before. I mean, him and his wife been on the city plan for 60 years.
A lot longer than he worked.
And we've been supplementing that, and that's what I don't think's fair, because it actually really hurts the employees. Because the employees now and into the future are the ones, you know, I mean, $800 a month, that's 10 grand a year.
It is. So we have that to look at, calculating, adjusting the DDB.
So anyway, I mean, I think collectively, we all want the same thing. We want to get to making sure that we can take care of the employees.
Guys, I was just gonna say, I think what Daniel was saying is really the same as the surcharge. I think the question is, what's the fair amount of the surcharge? I think there's a difference between saying you're not gonna allow spouses to be covered at all, or saying, okay, yes, we need coverage, but there's a cost, and then the employee itself can figure out whether or not that cost makes more sense with the city, or, you know, or something else. So I think that's the difference. $100 a month sounds a little low, and I think there'll probably be a lot of people who would be willing to pay more than that. The question is, what is the right amount?
Well, I mean, what I was saying really is that your spouse can get insurance, but whatever the cost is, it is the cost. You know, we're supplementing
Total
that
cost.
right now, and we
You have to
shouldn't
pay
be.
the employer's portion and the
Yeah.
employee's portion. And
Yeah.
some employers do that. They charge the whole, you know, it costs $1,000 a month.
That's what it is.
That's what they pay.
Regardless if they have options for other places.
Well, yeah,
I
regardless
mean,
if they have
well,
options
what
for other
direction
places.
do you all need in order to run numbers before next week? Are we running numbers on the employee, the spousal coverage, whatever it
I just
is?
think
Are
we-
are we saying no spousal coverage, or are we doing the surcharge?
Well, you can't,
You can do that.
well, you have to, no supplement is what we're looking at.
That's what I'm asking. I mean, we could not do any spousal coverage. I mean, not offer it. I mean, that's an option too, isn't it?
Well, if they didn't have credible coverage,
You'd have to
we'd
give
have
it
to
to
offer it to them at the full price.
We don't have to subsidize
Right.
it, but we could offer it to them at the full price. Or,
Well, there's some places though that you don't have to offer spousal coverage.
I think we ought to just,
You have to offer that to pay for it.
I think we just gotta look at all the numbers, because at the end of the day, the reason we're here is to try to figure out a plan that gets us a sustainable plan for the employees from now and
Since we've advertised the budget at what it is, any numbers we would be talking about, I don't know who really.
it wouldn't matter, because the budget would go down, not up.
Well, in the budget, we're talking about the information we needed for the budget to maybe pass by next week, I think in this case, to be able to get that.
As long as the top line number doesn't change, it doesn't matter.
Well, and then if it does, then there's options around that as well. I think the biggest thing is, as Will was saying, if we're established that we're maintaining a DDB, that in itself is a decision. Then the next decision is, and we're gonna use that DDB to fund an HRA, who then becomes eligible? That's really where that's
those
the
are the
decision.
two questions. A lot of the other stuff is
Well, eligible
detail.
would be pre-65 and post-65 retirees. And then you get into the spouse coverage.
And that's all retire, okay, add to that population, actives hired prior to July 1st, 2009, all actives through December 31st.
Well, not actives at all, these are retirees.
I know that we're talking about, well, part of the question is.
Who's eligible?
Who's eligible going forward?
forward.
If you're pre-65 today, do you get post-65 when you turn 65?
Yeah, that's the other question.
That's the other question.
Anybody that's retired as of January the 1st of 19 is eligible out.
for pre and post?
Say it again, Howard?
Anybody that's retired as of January the 1st is eligible for pre and post HRA.
January
They're meant to
1st,
be in the same
19?
Yes. Going twice?
Retire or retirement eligible? It's really December 31st.
So pre and post, by December 31st,
Is that retired or
2018.
retirement eligible? I apologize. Was that retired or retirement eligible? What was that?
They've been talking about retired.
Well, we didn't talk about both, retired and retired
Pre and
eligible.
post.
We have folks
Retire-
that are retirement eligible this year, they would be retirement eligible by the end of December 31st, but they're not retiring.
Right.
Still
They may
working.
choose to still work.
They're the folks that have hired since July 1st, 2009.
Yeah. And
Well,
they
that
have-
can't be, because,
Well, no, right. Well, she has 8 years.
right,
Before
she
she's
was
eligible.
2008.
She's eligible.
She's,
But then
yeah,
got
she
another-
still has 8 years before she's even eligible.
Right, but she has 8 years, so she, another 8 years on top of that to reach the 55,
Ms. Devine? Ms. Devine? Okay.
Yeah, her issue was the age 55.
That's right.
Yeah.
She wasn't, she was,
The lady here?
yeah, because she's, how old was she, 40?
Yeah.
She said she's
Said 40.
Steve asked her.
She volunteered.
You can hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Okay, wait, so let me just clear this up then. So it's pre and post, if they're eligible December 31st, but what about anyone hired before 2009? When they get to that point, are they gonna be both pre and post 65?
How are we gonna make that decision if we don't know what the numbers are and what that affects in long-term thing?
That's the number that we, that,
I mean, no offense, but I mean, you're asking me to just say
That's
yes or
fine,
no.
we can figure that out too, but y'all are being awful certain on the other one.
Well, I thought we
without
had,
saying numbers, too.
well, my idea was I thought we were going to get numbers. I mean, that was my understanding of why we wrote down all these lists and stuff today. So maybe I misunderstood.
Well,
So,
we can probably, why don't we,
Numbers, I mean, we're
um,
talking about.
well, why don't we kind of think about this, study this a little more until we get back together?
that's what I'm saying, the budget will be.
We're running
the
out of
budget is-
days.
is
Well,
considered at this point, so it's just a matter of continuing the conversation with the information that's being.
Cause the revenues are the
Well,
revenues.
I'm gonna make a decision. I wanna be able to say I'm making this decision because of this. If I just make a decision on a motion, it'd be stupid.
I agree, but we'll keep changing, so I don't know that Aon is gonna, we may not have all the numbers back from Aon.
They ought to be able to ballpark it. They've had enough information from us, and they've come up with a lot of recommendations.
so we're all.
Hey, we sat in this room and we were able to do it with Tower Watson sitting there moving that needle around. They know what our basis is, so if you make the changes, what does that look like?
And they've given us a lot of information to be able to give, like, that's how we made some of the projections that we've done for this point. It's just a matter of, most of their numbers have been based on a certain line demarcation in terms of which population. So if we're moving that needle to population,
See, I thought the needle was always set at 2009. That's what I've been basing off of everything that we had here. Because if you looked at our population based on that, you've got really, there's only about 700 people who fit that category. Everybody else is all way under. And then the reality of them
we
being
know how much like today. we have
25
how much-
years is 30 years or whatever it is now.
With today's retiree population, and actually in the numbers that we're looking for, we know how much it will cost to pay the DDB for retirees January 1. It's roughly $8.2 million.
For current retirees.
Current retirees and,
But are we using current numbers? Are we at the 80-20?
Okay.
DDB, paying DDB. They're no longer.
We
being
do.
our Blue Cross Blue
I
Shield.
mean, I just
We're
need
just
some
paying
feedback
that
based on
settlement.
what you said.
if we adjust that DDB, our liability,
I guess.
So I also want to make something clear, because Missy said we're gonna spend based upon current actuals 8.4. That number, if you look at the numbers that are out there based upon the retirees, that population is projected to grow a little bit over the next couple of years. So in future budgets, it's not gonna be 8.4, potentially, per the estimate, will be about 10.1. So we're still gonna see some increase in our
But
costs.
you're
just to
assuming,
pay
but you're assuming there's nobody gonna time out.
Well, you know, if you act as the
The
actuarial,
actuaries.
they'll tell you they have
Built
factored that in.
right.
But, you know,
Mobility
we've seen
tables.
realistically that it doesn't always follow that.
right, so this is the breakout they gave us in the last presentation from them.
Yeah.
But again, you know, so that's assuming the full population. Y'all have already capped off some of the population by drawing the line at the 2009 mark. So, but this is not.
See, I thought that's what we were using as our basis for all of it, was 2000.
That was
If you were in before 2009.
That was a new,
Yeah.
new.
What they were basing it on was anybody retired as of December 31st of this year, meaning actually retired from the city, whether active and retired or retiree already
But
retired.
am I just making this up? Didn't we have this conversation about that population? And it was, what I have in my notes was it was around 700 people that would stay in the system.
We'd add back to the, which would
Right.
make it option 1D instead of 1C or.
1D.76.
Right.
Yeah.
What's changing now is discussions about how does the spouse's DDB factor in? Do we shift that spouse's DDB
To the
retiree's
retirees?
DDB? If we stay within that total dollar amount.
Or do we reduce the
There'll be some
DDB?
that doesn't know.
We're about to lose a quorum, y'all, so, any other questions you have for staff, let's, sounds good.
There was an executive session item, I think that,
We need to add rain to it.
if we're losing a quorum though, I guess do you need us to have it? Yes, well, I don't think it counts toward the.
Can't vote.
We're not voting anyway, are we?
Can't do executive session, well, she can't even attend the executive session.
That's true.
And then the summer schedule, I do need some feedback on that.
Well, I think we're good to go, other than the statutory issue Mr. Duval just raised. Figure that out, y'all.
I'll leave the room and y'all decide what you wanna do.
I like the summer schedule.
I won't be sent to jail.
Not for this anyway.
Like the summer schedule, we need to
Who's
vote to
going to
approve
tell?
it. Let's vote to approve the summer schedule with, revisit the issue Duval raised. So move, a second?
Well, you don't need to vote during the
All
work
right,
session.
okay, we don't vote, I forgot. We like it.
Okay.
Keep rolling. Go ahead, we'll see you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Move we adjourn?
No executive session. Well, we can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. Okay,
Say aye, Howard.
good, hear you.
We're adjourned.
You done?
Move to a second.
Second.
Favor aye.
Aye.
Oh, Ms. Devine, get her aye. We're done.
Thank you all.